a place that rejected everyone who reached it, though some were allowed to reach it, and only S-rank heroes ever managed to get to the forbidden dungeon. One of them was a young man with dark hair and glasses, and though he had reached a dangerous place, he showed no fear and in fact wanted to be there. Many adventurers vanished without a trace in this dungeon, and the hero facing the monsters this time will likely be no exception because the danger to him and his team is great. A few days earlier, things were fine. The commander ordered his men to check everything carefully as they moved items to another place. Everything followed the S-rank group's plan of the future. Later, the man saw someone standing idle, and they told him the girl had problems and could not carry the load, but she objected and said she could work and carry boxes. On the other side, two people were clearly tense with each other. The young man turned to the tall man and asked what to do about him since he was behaving badly. The young man put his hand on the warrior's armor to stop him from leaving. The tall man with a sword on his back clearly did not want to talk, but he did not resist and stayed. The dark-haired man looked at the group's leader, planned for the future, and asked again why he had treated the girl so badly. The young man was a former swordsman named Jill. The group's leader, a tall man named Godaka, looked at the other man with irritation and delayed his answer because he did not want to discuss the issue at all, clearly feeling superior. The young man said he was here to keep order and didn't care who violated it because he wasn't going to be silent. Gil advised Godak to think about his reputation as an adventurer. The man put his hand to his forehead and exhaled heavily. He did not understand why he had upset the other man so much and asked him to explain why the young man disliked the methods the leader of the plan for the future group used on subordinates. She tried to stop the young man because she did not want to cause a conflict, but he stopped her and said not to interrupt because he had to finish what he was doing. Gil looked at Godak and said he was unhappy with Godak's activities, but because he had a contract with the man, he did not want to break it and planned to follow its terms. Gil asked what the man would do if he left. Maybe he would tell everyone the young men were a burden. Gotha clearly did not like hearing that, and the other man said he needed to temper his order. Preparing to enter the hardest dungeon, the group could not afford any discord. He went to Ha and listened to what Jill told him, but he could not admit he was wrong because he did not believe he was. The man turned to leave, but warned Gil not to stand out or try to give orders, since in the dungeon he would still have to obey the leader or be killed for disobedience. Content to watch Go. The young man said nothing, so the other man, unable to do anything with him, spoke to his subordinates who were carrying boxes of supplies. As they moved left into the hellish area, Gil heard someone trying to speak behind him but staying silent for a long time, and when he turned he saw the girl he had defended, looking confused and unsure how to act. Kledaha, a recent assistant on the future plan, thanked the young man for his help and admitted she was ashamed she could not handle it alone. Klaha also apologized to the man for making him defend her in front of Godaha. The young man said he was only doing what needed to be done and did not need thanks. Once preparations were complete, the supply carts and the entire team set off because the road to the dungeon was far and the preparations had taken a long time. As the carriages moved, the girl decided to speak to the man who had helped her and asked Jill if he had really learned swordsmanship from a hermit. The man laughed awkwardly, surprised that Klahab believed everything she was told, since people also said he was the famous dragon slayer in the East. The girl added that she had learned everything from Godok, because he was the one who told her about Jill. The young man replied that he had not killed the dragon alone but with his master, though he could manage on his own. The young man didn't have time to finish when the carriage stopped abruptly. He fell and said he would never get used to that. After making sure he was okay, Klaha continued the conversation. While holding things, the girl asked Jill if she wanted to sit, and Jill agreed, and the guy said he disliked waiting so long to reach a very dangerous dungeon. After a short pause, Klahabi looked a little sad and said she was only the group's new assistant, meant for the future. Lowering her head, she asked Gila for permission to ask a question that had been on her mind for a long time. Klaufa turned her head to study the young man's reaction and asked how she could become stronger. At first, Gil did not seem to understand what she wanted him to say. Staring at Klakha, Gil looked horrified by what the girl wanted him to say. The assistant could not understand why the person she was talking to reacted so strangely to her question. Confused, the girl began to explain herself, but the young man's only thought was why she had asked him, since he was not someone special. Klaha said she had loved adventure since childhood and wanted to travel someday. So she was packing and training for battles. Now she had reached the age to become an adventurer. The girl replied that she wants to master the sword because survival skills are vital for adventures, and strength will help her defeat monsters. Klaya struggled to achieve her dream because no one wanted to teach or mentor her since it seemed too burdensome. When the girl first joined the plan of the future, she was told she would undergo special training to raise her rank so she could join the main staff. Kledaha stayed an assistant because she was only told to watch and remember what others did. The young man realized no one actually knew how to teach properly. The young man said he had been invited to the team specifically because he wasn't part of the main squad, but could help strengthen it. Gil knew teaching her would be difficult. She was embarrassed and admitted that agreeing to her request would be a burden. He gave an example and asked what Klamaha would do if a monster dog or another monster appeared and attacked her. She was surprised by the change of subject. Kladaha assumed she would have to aim, find a weak spot, and strike it. The young man disagreed and suggested a different approach. Gil said it would be better to predict where the monster would flee and set traps, because the best plan is to prepare for battles in advance. The girl did not expect the question to be answered that way, and the guy said the situation was really a trick, but the young man's answer is still the best solution for Klaha. Because there are no rules or battles, each person's methods can vary greatly, and the same person may use different approaches in different situations. The most important thing was to see how a person adapted to the situation and what they could do when in danger. Gil added that the main point was that the battle's outcome would depend on the right choice. Even if a method seems like it will never be used, it will probably come in handy someday. The more options someone has, the stronger they become. A tactic that works on its own can help in any situation at the most unexpected moment, even when it seems nothing can help. The young man said he only meant that he needed to study more and gain experience and knowledge, and you should also try to avoid injuries and maintain a healthy lifestyle. Klaha studied the interlocutor and observed that he seemed very serious, and the young man smiled and said he was simply a realist. Averting his eyes, Gil realized that although he spoke confidently, he was only good with a sword and had few backup options. In other respects, the young man was not very capable, so he had only one real strength, but he understood this and tried not to envy those who were different. Klubha was surprised the young man was so hard on himself. He later said he had very poor eyesight, which greatly reduced his advantage over others. The man also said that during the fight with the dragon, a curse was placed on his eyes, and of all the strengthening effects, only the strength increase worked on him. The curse sometimes kept the young man from spotting traps and other obstacles, and he had another weakness. The girl was scared when she heard this because she knew how difficult it was for Gil. It turned out the man had topographical disorientation. At first it seemed no worse than a curse, but it was actually a serious problem. He explained that before he reached the right place, he had set off in the wrong direction from the right state, and she admitted the problem was more serious than the curse. The young man said that if his glasses broke, he'd be done for, and if he ended up alone in the dungeon, he might never get back. The girl fell silent at the man's revelation, understanding how hard it had been for him. Later, Jill took out a package. It was a glasses case. Jill said it would be very hard for him if they went missing, making clear the responsibility she would have. But it was her duty as an assistant to the squad. Later, the couple were surprised to find the carriages had stopped. Looking out, they realized they had reached the dungeon. Not wanting to delay anyone, the young man and woman hurried out. Klaaha took everything she needed and said goodbye to the man because she had to leave with the other assistants. The young man waited a moment, then decided to say one more thing. Gil offered to teach the girl more skills for the future after this dungeon, and at first she thought she had misheard, but he repeated himself. The young man didn't mind teaching swordsmanship classes and wasn't too proud to teach others, and his technique wasn't unique because he had studied under several masters. Holding out his hand to the interlocutor, the young man said he accepted her proposal, though he did not feel worthy of such an honor. Klauha was very pleased and bowed low, taking his outstretched hand with both hands and thanking Gil for deciding to help her. The promise was unexpected and unusual. Klauha was glad she could finally be an adventurer instead of just an assistant in the plan for the future. After shaking hands, The couple agreed to resume their conversation once they left the dungeon and felt safer, but neither of them expected what would happen in such a dangerous place. 2 hours later, the young man, after smashing his glasses into small pieces, was left completely alone in a dangerous dungeon, having done what he feared most by telling the girl his weaknesses. On his knees, Gil had a tear running down one cheek and felt desperate, knowing it would be hard to get free or to survive at all. An incredible thing happened some time ago. The maze was captured successfully, but only for a limited time. Even S-rank adventurers have not advanced beyond the 3rd level yet. The support team laid out a safe route that the wave team used to advance successfully. The main squad advanced, defeating enemies as the warriors cleared the path to the lower floors. Each level had a master, a monster given special magical power by the maze to protect it. Unlike the other magical monsters, the owner remained in the main hall, waiting for the adventurers instead of roaming the maze. In some cases, the master's room can be passed through to reach the next level, but that is not possible on the 3rd level. The team became noticeably wary, especially Godak. Gil saw the monster and rushed at it first to distract it. Then something happened the young man did not expect, because it had never happened to him before. As planned, the vanguard took the blow, positioned with the attackers in front. There were no complaints about the tactic because it worked. Since Gil used only a sword, he expected to be on the front line and wasn't worried about a sudden attack from afar. It was easier for him since it was a good workout, but he still felt like no one was helping him. Before he could think about what was happening, the young man saw his friends standing behind him. Godaha's calling card was a powerful sword called the Eraser, and he watched the man charge his sweat with magical energy before the fight. It was justified because the dungeon master was too strong an opponent. Everyone knew what would happen if they missed a strike against the monster. Using the sword was smart, so the young man signaled to the leader he would buy time to attack. The unexpected happened when Godaha, with the young man still in the area, launched a lethal attack and triggered a magical release. Gil did not know what was happening behind him because he was distracting the monster, and later he realized that Man H had waited until the man left the affected area. The young man shouted to Godaka to slow down and wait, but it was useless. Using his sword, he struck and a pitch-black flash appeared. The young man looked back and realized he had no time to dodge. The monster's hand loomed over Gil, poised to finish him while Godaha waited for the fight to end. The monster struck the young man, slamming him into the floor. An explosion then caused irreparable damage. The shockwave struck the monster and the swordsman who was drawing its attention away from the team, and it also shook the surrounding area and the rest of the group. First, the ground vanished under Gil's feet, and he began to fall. Everything felt unreal, as if it was not happening to him or he was dreaming. Turning his head, the young man saw the owner of the 3rd level of the maze flying down beside him in a friendly way. Gil decided that even in this situation, he would not forget the monster wanted to kill him, so he would not just fall down and wait for the monster to reach the ground. With all his strength, the young man grabbed his sword and launched a desperate attack to destroy the creature beside him. Eventually, the young man lay on the ground, lost consciousness for a while, and when he woke, he realized he had won and was lying on his enemy's body. Pulling his sword free from the monster, he told himself the dungeon's 3rd level boss was really strong, but when he looked up, he reconsidered. Gil had fallen from too great a height to have any chance of getting back. The young man realized he was trapped here, and it was all because of Godaki, who had deliberately sentenced him to death. The young man knew he would never forget this. Gil couldn't understand why the team leader had done it, since their recent quarrel was no excuse. After a recent, very unpleasant conversation, Godaka decided to get rid of the person who had contradicted him. Raising his head, the young man shouted that when he returned, he would certainly kill the man, because he would not rest until the man paid for what he had done. The young man faced a major problem. He did not know how he could return because he was completely alone. Remembering his team's composition, he hoped there were people in the squad who could help him. An image of the girl he'd been talking to when they reached this dangerous dungeon came to mind. The young man wanted to believe there were other decent people besides Klaha who would not accept the injustice Kodaha had committed. With only Klaha in the man's head, he figured a crowd of girls could pull him out, and all he needed was a long rope the girls could lower down. To begin his impossible plan, Guild shouted that he was downstairs and waiting for rescue. No one answered because the squad had gone. After examining the ceiling closely, the young man noticed something strange and creepy upstairs, as creatures seemed to be on it, and Gildan despaired because he was still wearing his glasses. Lifting the vision instrument up, the young man was relieved they were intact because the glasses had kept him relatively safe, but later the glasses in the frame cracked. The glasses lay shattered, meaning his next stay in the dungeon would be very hard. The young man was thrown into a dangerous adventure where he was vulnerable. As the young man adjusted to the idea that he would have to remain in the dungeon far longer than he expected, everyone froze at the sight of the collapse. He fell silent for a moment, and Krakow remembered that she had just spoken and shaken hands with the young man, who said it was all an accident. Because the third-level master was so dangerous, releasing magic was their only way to win, but the leader ordered a retreat, and the girl asked why she had been abandoned in Gil. She didn't understand why they needed to use something like that when the man had time to move away. Clayhaw scolded him, saying plainly it had been done on purpose. Tired of the girl's words, the man stepped closer, grabbed her by the throat and pinned her to the wall. Klaas began gasping for breath, nearly suffocating. Gudaya let her go, and the girl collapsed to the ground. The man replied that even if it had been deliberate, no one would dare to say anything to him because the young man was only someone to support. Plainhot refused to give up, aware she was much weaker than the man, and threatened to file a complaint with the guild against him. The girl cried out that the commander's actions would be treated as a tax on a guild member, costing him his adventurer status, and that attempting to flee the scene would be punishable by law. Klaha also said the witnesses would confirm everything, but Gaudaha asked whether she was sure people would help her. The assistant failed to grasp what Godok meant, then turned and looked at everyone present. The leader of the future plan said none of the team members would confirm the girl's statements, and one of the girls asked why the men had done that, while all the team members looked very scared and it was clear they feared Godok. The man said Klacha only believed the guilt had gone because of him, and everyone who hears her story will think it's just the inventions of a girl who can't do anything. Reminding Klaha of her situation, the man turned and ordered the team to hurry out of the dungeon so they would not waste time. The assistant sat still, sure she could not help her friend at all, and remembering how bravely he had fought, blamed herself for feeling helpless. She couldn't accept that she could at least try, for example, to reach out, and her fear kept her from doing anything. After a moment, another squad member approached Klaneha, took her hand to help her stand, and asked her to leave immediately. The man added that if the girl were left alone in the maze, she would not be able to survive, so she should simply obey Godak's order. Klaja looked at Harland in despair. The assistant asked why no one would help someone unfairly sent to certain death, and Holland said, Godaha is the only person the whole squad will listen to. The country had only one S-rank squad, so no one dared contradict its commander. The girl couldn't believe people would act like that and ignore their conscience. Holland said it was normal because everyone chased their own goals, noting that he had to feed his family. Klahad refused to listen. The girl knew she couldn't leave things as they were, even though she was alone. Seeing the assistant's expression, her friend said she couldn't do anything. Klaja understood it, but refused to admit it. The man told the assistant that it would be pointless for her to search for Gil alone and that this happens often. Hodland pointed out that adventurers often went through things like this, so it wasn't surprising, but the girl refused to put up with it. The man seemed to be trying to relieve his stress, so he took out a cigarette and began to smoke, repeating that no one could say anything against Godaki. Klaja clenched her fists and said she did not want that fate because she had not become an adventurer to endure it. Hoglan patted her on the head and she apologized to him for being emotional. Portland also apologized to the girl for not taking her side, explaining he had joined the squad only to earn money. Later, the squad returned to the base, and Kleha stayed in the guild. Reluctant to rejoin the team, Klaha knew that leaving would keep her from entering the most difficult maze, and that she lacked the strength to resist. 3 months had passed since Gilles disappeared into the dungeon, but Klaja kept going and trained to grow stronger. She knew that one day she would return to that dungeon and find a path to the right level, where she could find the one she had tried so hard for. Kleha fought on, hoping Jill was alive, because she would do anything to get him to the surface, and he should not have disappeared into the maze. The girl ran to the dungeon every day, so she would not lose her motivation to improve. One day, a carriage appeared near him. Klauhaffa noticed that a nobleman had come to the lab. Later, the girl saw armored figures by the carriage and realized the Order of Holy Knights stood before her. Clow did not know why a military unit directly under the church was in a place like that, so the girl thought something had happened. After a while, a lady passed the girl someone had called. The Holy Virgin turned to the caller and asked them not to call her anymore. The long-haired girl smiled and replied that she did not look like a saint, but her modesty only proved her noble nature. Seeing the Holy Virgin left Clawhall momentarily confused, and she realized how influential she could be compared to the Virgin. The girl began to remember Godakis's words that she was only an assistant with nothing, that she could do nothing about the injustice she faced, and that she could not help anyone in need. But Clasha remembered Gil's advice that she could choose a strategy to reach her goal, so she resolved not to give up and to do her best. She knew she was not a full-fledged adventurer and could not handle things on her own. Klausel knew she would never forgive herself if she left things as they were, and after deciding on a bold step, she began to approach the knights in the Holy Virgin. After apologizing for the trouble, Klaha thought about how to ask for help to save Gil. Meanwhile, wolf-like creatures began approaching the young man in the maze, holding the fish in their teeth and unwilling to share it. The young man showed no fear of his rivals, and began biting one of the creatures to make clear he would not back down or give them the prey. Jumping onto one of the wolves, the young man forced it to surrender, and the other monsters fled to avoid him. Pressing his hand to his chest to signal victory after such a short battle, Gil acted strangely because he had been alone for a long time and hadn't spoken to anyone. Once calmer, the young man giggled oddly and rubbed his forehead, relieved he had defeated the creatures who had underestimated him so quickly. The young man looked at his defeated opponent and said he was no longer ordinary, more like a gorilla from the human world, because only someone equally strong could match his strength. He fell silent, realizing 3 months had passed since he disappeared into the dungeon, a long time. Eventually, the young man bit into a piece of meat he had managed to get, since food was hard to find in those conditions. By then, the young man knew he had reached his limit. Surviving alone so long had become nearly impossible. The fish he took from the wolves was spoiled, but there was no other food. Though he was coping, having nothing to live on made things hard for him. While Gil ate a fish, he found a crystal inside it that was worth a lot of money. The young man went to the board where the guy had drawn Godak to show off, showed the crystal, and later threw it away because it was useless in the dungeon. After eating only fish for some time, the young man realized he might lose his mind, because he couldn't bear being without contact with others. Gil briefly thought he was already dead, but quickly pushed the thought aside because he couldn't afford to despair. He believed that if he kept moving forward, he would reach the surface. Preparing to move on, Gil began to say goodbye to Godaki's drawing, promising to meet him on the surface next time because he was sure he would soon leave the maze. Gil left his temporary shelter and walked forward with determination, not knowing where the path would lead, but sure it was better than staying put. One day, a man read a book that divided people with topographical cretinism into 2 types. The first were the stupid ones who did not doubt themselves, so they got lost but kept going confidently. The second type felt insecure and panicked from a constant fear of being lost. Even on the right path, fear made them take the wrong direction. Gil considered himself the second type. Even during training with his mentor, the young man often mixed up directions, and the mentor laughed and joked about it. Although he considered himself the second type, he realized panicking would only make him wander more, and told himself he would never get lost again. However, once the young man presented himself confidently, his path went downhill, and he began to doubt his choice. Gil found it strange that he always went up, yet now the path sloped down and he did not turn back. The young man decided he would always move forward no matter what, but a trap appeared beneath his feet out of nowhere. Despite convincing himself he was the second type of person with topographical cretinism, he still belonged to the first because he didn't think about where he was going and walked too confidently for someone who didn't know the way. Not noticing the button under his foot, the man stepped on it, and a wave appeared beside him, quickly coming closer. Water quickly swept the young man off his feet and began carrying him away in an unknown direction. Gil opened his mouth in surprise but could not make a sound. As soon as the wave died down, Gil grabbed the edge of the surface and started coughing because he had swallowed the liquid that washed him away. The young man was soaked and realized the trap he fell into was very clever because it drew no attention. Sensing someone nearby, the man realized the trap was set to lure a victim into the right spot and then attack. To avoid being defenseless, the young man quickly drew his sword and thrust it at the enemy. Because the man wasn't wearing glasses, he didn't immediately recognize who was in front of him and only noticed when his eyes began to focus. A long-haired girl stood in front of the young man, holding her staff and not looking like she wanted to attack him. Jill looked at the man who suddenly appeared in front of him, and later the girl turned to look at the one who appeared in front of her because of the waves. For a while, the young man could not believe he was not hallucinating. With poor eyesight, he could only see a silhouette, but he realized the figure was a man, not a monster. A soft laugh escaped her as she said she was human and surprised because she didn't look like anyone else. Gil couldn't believe he wasn't dreaming. He apologized for his reaction. The man said he had lost his glasses, so he could not see what was in front of him. To be sure, the girl held up 4 fingers and asked how many the guy could see, and he said 38, so she realized his eyesight was very poor. The young man could not understand why, after falling into such a dangerous trap, a monster did not appear in front of him. But he met a man. Right after the young man thought it, a huge monster that looked like a giant crab appeared next to the couple. The creature spoke, and the young man exhaled in relief, convinced that a monster always appeared after the trap. Sitting down for a moment, the girl repeated that she was human because the man did not seem to believe her. Gild couldn't understand why the girl stayed so calm with a monster behind her that he could see and hear, so the young man began drawing his sword to ward off the monster's attack. A moment later, the young man shouted he would use a hidden blade, likely to make his intentions clear to the girl. Moments later, the young man delivered a fatal blow to the huge monster, splitting its body in half. Though he couldn't see, he fought with practiced skill. The flooded floor caused Jill to slip and fall, so the girl hurried to ask if he was all right. Although impressed by how quickly the man handled the monster, the girl worried more about how her new friend felt. Grabbing her hands, he was relieved that she was a real person. Tears of happiness streamed down the young man's face because he hadn't talked to anyone for a long time and reacted intensely. Touching the water with her palm, the girl realized it was probably hers, but the young man understood nothing. The girl said that the moment she touched the liquid, she felt a magic circle in it. The man could not tell if it was true because he was only a simple swordsman. Looking up, the girl guessed the water had probably brought her here, along with her new friend. The newly discovered cave the couple were in was large and airy, with a very high ceiling. When the young man asked why the girl was in the dungeon, she said she had come with the holy knights to clear the maze, and Gil figured she was now in the same position as him. The man believed she had fought a 3rd-level master, and later her friend condemned her to death, but the girl said that was not true. The girl said she had been trapped and moved to a new place, adding that she had not come alone, and that, unlike her, the Holy Knights had done their job flawlessly. Armored men led the girl to the 4th level, where no one went, and later she stepped on a button that activated the trap. The young man was surprised the girl showed up with knights instead of adventurers. The interviewee hesitated briefly about telling her the details, and after a moment's thought continued. The girl turned out to be a researcher, and when Jill asked if he and the knights should explore the maze, she agreed. 3 months ago, the high churches claimed they sensed sinister energy in the dungeon, but the girl herself felt nothing of the sort. Gil decided not to wait and asked the girl to help him wash, since he had not washed properly in a long time and she likely had frequency magic from the church. The girl wanted to give it to the young man herself, but she didn't dare because he had asked for it. She added that he smelled awful. The Holy Virgin said this was normal, since in a place like this it was not surprising, and she hurried to fulfill Gil's request. Lucky to have met her, the man thought that in just a few days, he could already go crazy from isolation. As he looked at his conversation partner, the man felt only grateful that she had simply appeared beside him. Thanking the girl, the young man began to walk in a circle, pleased at how clean he felt. After a while, the girl asked whether a curse had been placed on the young man's eyes, which surprised the listener because he had not expected her to notice so soon. The man told her not to worry, because he'd already figured out how to remove the curse, and praised her magic for sensing his vulnerability to her. The girl also noted he was very strong, since he had destroyed such a large water crab with a single blow. The young man replied that strength was the only thing he had. The monsters reappeared behind the Holy Virgin before she could say anything else, and the girl froze in place. A few seconds later, something rushed past her so fast she had no time to see it. The young man saved his new friend again, cutting the creatures in half so quickly the girl did not even have time to flinch. She suggested that the girl return to his base so they could talk calmly. The other person agreed, and the man thanked her for her trust. The young man assured them he remembered the way to the base and they'd arrive soon, and the girl said she couldn't wait to see his hideout. The joy faded quickly because the couple reached the shelter not after a few minutes, but after 5 hours, leaving everyone very tired. The girl said her legs were very sore from walking, and the young man apologized but had nothing more to say in his defense. After they sat down by the shore, the couple could finally breathe out and rest, and the girl at last introduced herself. The Holy Virgin's name was Lilia, a member of the church, and she felt the name was too long, so she offered several shorter options. To make it easier for him, she said he could call her Lily, Leah, or Aunt Leah. After the young man introduced himself, he wondered why the girl was called Anne. Pointing to herself, Leah said she was already 20 and looked like an adult. Gil replied that he still couldn't see her that way. Gil was 19. He remembered the rules for talking to older people, the power hierarchy and other social layers, so he asked if he needed to speak more respectfully, and Leah said that was not necessary, apologizing. The man thought he was acting strangely, but Lily said he could speak to her any way he wanted. Gil decided to explain what had happened, but Leah interrupted and said she already knew the main points because she had been told everything. Before entering the maze, a blonde girl approached and asked her to find Jill in the dungeon. The young man immediately recognized Klaha. The young man felt relieved someone remembered him. Since his disappearance had lasted so many months, people would have thought Jill had died. The young man was so happy a tear ran down his face, but the girl said they hoped at least to find his body, which was clearly unnecessary. That made sense because the young man couldn't leave or contact anyone. A man was outside waiting for him. Looking at him, Leah asked how he had gotten so deep when he had disappeared on the 3rd level. Because the couple was already on at least the 4th level, it was odd that Jill went down alone. The man said he had been thrown down at first, so he wasn't at the bottom by his own choice. Lily was surprised. Gil said he did not understand Gadaki's motives, but at the same moment a member of his team struck him as the monster attacked, causing them both to fall to a lower level, and the man tried to climb back up and move forward but didn't know if he was doing the right thing. Day after day, the young man kept going until one day he fell into a trap that swept him away, and there he met Leah. Seeing a human silhouette ahead, the man felt deep relief because he was close to losing his mind. The girl was surprised when the man compared himself to a gorilla in the story, and he clarified it was only a metaphor. Lily said Jill's friend was terrible, so they would punish him when they got out, and the young man shouldn't worry because Aunt Leah would go with him. The young man said 3 months had passed since his disappearance, so he hoped to find a way out soon, while Leah offered to continue up the stairs as Jill had before. The young man reminded them they would soon face the 4th level master and have to fight him. Lily did not understand what he was trying to tell her. The monster waited for anyone who reached it, and only a few people, like Gil and Lee, could get that far. The young man said they would not be able to defeat this monster because several factors would prevent them. Earlier, the young man was already on his way to the next level, but a monster blocked his path. Stuck for several days, he could not find a way forward because the monster was stronger than him. More accurately, the beast wasn't stronger than the previous one, but tougher, and that hindered Gil. The young man said he could not hit his opponent because he could not see any weak points, and if he made a mistake, he would break his sword. Glasses would have helped, but the man lost them long ago. Gil corrected himself and said he might just be excusing his weakness. Had the young man been a better swordsman, he would have cut through the monster, so he began training and paused by the water to recover. The girl was surprised to see the guy thinking of drinking water and realized his eyesight was very poor. She held a small amount of liquid in her palm that Jill called water. Lily asked if he was sure it was hers. Seeing the liquid in the other person's hand, the young man doubted he was right, and Leah offered her new friend a magical stomach cleanse. Suggesting the man go to the boss, the young man said he had a sharp stomachache and could not fight until he was stronger. Lily said she would arrange for Jill to beat the level's master easily because she was very capable. Lily said she could use amplification magic to bring out his story and turn the young man into a real gorilla, but he replied that it would not help. Leah was surprised, but Jill continued, saying he was holding back his strength because the sword was too cheap to withstand his power. The girl thought the young man was just showing off because he kept talking about his strength. The young man denied it and said it was not like that. Any sword can break if used carelessly, so the priority was to find a replacement, since he had quickly bought his current one after his previous sword broke. Aiming accurately to hit the right spot was harder without glasses. After the man's words, the woman decided to ask him a question. Leo wondered how many times the young man would have to strike the monster to defeat it. After a short pause, Gil said a single blow would be enough for him. The guy looked at the other person and made it clear he wasn't joking, saying that if he struck with full force he would instantly destroy the owner of the 4th level. Lily stayed calm and said nothing at first. Later she said the young man seemed very self-confident, and he replied that he relied only on his experience, though he still feared breaking his only sword. If a young man loses his weapon, he won't be able to keep clearing the dungeon. The girl understood everything. Leah touched her sword and said she would give the man a head start so he could hit the monster twice. Lily enchanted the blade, making it an immensely powerful, invulnerable magic sword. When the guy handed the sword back to the young man, it began to glow, and the girl said she had put holy magic on it. Gil was surprised because Leah quoted lines from Surad's holy scriptures. She said she remembered them from reading the book in class. Gil's weapon wasn't a sacred sword, but it had been strengthened, and the young man thanked Leah and said he now owed her, which made Lily smile. Wishing the young man good luck in the battle, the girl heard him say he would definitely win, but though it was about 10 minutes to the monster she knew from past experience, the path would take a little longer. 3 hours later, the couple reached the right place. The young man apologized again for taking so long to get back to a place he had already been. Leah looked at the gate, exhaled, and asked if they could enter. Gil replied that he was ready for battle. The young man pressed his palms to the gate and pushed it, and the doors swung open, letting the couple inside. When Leah and Jill passed through the gate, a sinister energy closed in around them, and this was only the beginning. A huge monster appeared before the two people, resembling an elk with a menacing muzzle, but neither of them was afraid. The monster let out a deep growl. The young man said he would launch a frontal attack despite the danger. Having lost his sight, he still refused to back down. Drawing his sword from its scabbard, the young man faced the monster and shouted that he would destroy it. Leah looked at the monster and assumed it was a nightmare from the Apocrypha she'd read about. Eventually, the creature began moving its horns, and they slowly closed until they looked stuck together. Pointing its 2 horns fused into one, the monster charged the young man, who did not stay in place. Gripping his flawed sword, the young man leaped up and charged at his enemy with all his strength. Immediately, the horns connected to reinforce the attack began to crack and fall apart. Gil defeated the master of the 4th level with a single blow. Leaping away from the fallen body of the defeated monster, the young man admitted he still had much to learn. The young man turned to the opponent he had once been unable to defeat and looked relieved. As he exhaled, he heard clapping. The girl praised him, asked if he was okay, and said it went better than she expected. Gil said everything went well, though he was surprised because every time he had used this technique before, his swords never stayed upright. Recalling his past, the man could not remember how many weapons he had changed. Leah simply made sure she could help. Watching the girl, the young man realized she was more than she seemed, since her magic was very strong and she could not be a mere church servant. Leah was stronger than any priest, so he assumed she was on the level of an archbishop or cardinal, neither of whom he had ever seen. Recalling a recent conversation about age, the young man believed the girl was well over 20 because she was so capable. Gil figured the person before him might not be a girl, but an elderly grandmother whose experience exceeded all guesses. Looking at his companion again, the young man tried to push the thought away, but realized it might be true. After 3 months in the dungeon, the man realized he could be wrong about many things, and tears ran down his face. Realizing his emotions were getting the better of him again, Gil forced himself to calm down and admit he had only let foolish thoughts take over. Leah approached the monster and asked the man who he was. The young man said he could not see because his poor eyesight prevented him from doing so. Remembering the monster's features, she tried to decide which animal it most resembled. Overwhelmed by her thoughts, Leah lost touch with reality, but after a while she realized. Lily guessed the creature might look like a horse because it had 4 legs, but she was only guessing. It wasn't that simple, but Leah chose not to focus on it, brushed herself off and got up from the floor. Finding the gate unguarded, the girl pointed to it and said they could pass now. The young man took his time and decided to tell Lily something important before they continued their journey. Gil told his companion he did not know the terrain at all. She did not understand what he meant. Lowering his head, the young man said he wasn't sure a passage to the next level waited for them behind this door. Jill also said that if Leah thought they were going the wrong way, she should say so right away, but the girl cut her off. Lily accepted the young man's promise and said everything would be fine, since they could decide together where to go. Leah added that Jill can just rely on her aunt because she likes exploring the area, and the young man clearly did not expect that reaction. The girl added that since she rarely left the house, she liked studying atlases to learn about new places. Leah was very lazy and preferred to stay home, but she enjoyed reading traveler's notes and other adventure guides. Pointing to herself, Leah said she would be the captain on their journey, so the guy didn't have to worry about what would happen next. Worried, the young man decided to go along with what the girl said because it was easier. Gilles, his mentor, tricked him onto a ship that was later attacked by monsters he had to fight, but even in the chaos, he found peace. After choosing which way to go, the couple decided to go that way because their thoughts had aligned. Jill and Leah were similar in that even in a crisis they did not give up and kept going, confident they had chosen the right path. Their fighting strength doubled and their morale rose because they were together, which improved their chances of success. In just a month, the couple descended to the 5th level of the dungeon. The path was hard, but nothing could break the resolve of those who desperately wanted to survive and escape. After a while, the couple passed through a tunnel, the young man walking ahead and pulling something behind him that Lily sat on. The structure kept the girl from walking, and the young man was clearly not pleased with the arrangement. The girl looked up and said they still couldn't reach the surface for some reason, which was odd. Seeing Gil breathe heavily, Leah asked whether carrying her in the cart had become hard after they'd been moving so long. The man said he was fine, and pulling a cart with another man in it was good exercise for him. Leah turned to the man she was talking to and asked whether she was heavy. Gil stayed silent, and she grew a little angry. Later, the young man said the cart was actually a poor workout for him, and he could feel himself growing weaker by the second. The girl liked the answer and laughed, saying it was exactly what she wanted to hear. Leah decided to say the maze was very deep, because they must have been climbing the whole time. Her thoughts turned to the holy night she had left behind. Lily wanted to apologize to the people in armor because she had disappeared so suddenly. She thought they were angry with her. After a while, the young man could no longer stand it. The young man stopped and said he had long thought something they both had to admit. Leah didn't understand what the man meant because he didn't say clearly what he thought. Gil caught his breath, gathered his strength, and decided to speak up. Opening his eyes, the young man said the girl should have already realized they were lost. Leah turned around and looked at her companion. Lily didn't seem worried at all, but Jill was very worried. The man said they'd been walking too long because he couldn't sink so deep that he wouldn't come up within 4 months. Lily tried to calm Gil, but he wouldn't listen. He said they had to admit they'd most likely been going the wrong way all along, which is why they couldn't get out. The girl looked at her interlocutor, closed her eyes, and later said the man himself did not understand what was happening. Leah said people unfamiliar with the terrain fall into 2 types. The man knew this, but he didn't grasp Lily's point. The girl smiled at the puzzled young man, then raised her hand, pointed at the guy, and decided to explain something to her. First are the people who truly go down the wrong path, but that did not apply to Gil, even though he did not believe it. She continued, saying they always chose the road by intuition and often agreed, and the young man added that it had always been that way. Leah said it could not be that 2 people would constantly choose the wrong path at once, because the chance that both suffer from topographical cretinism is too small. Gil grew desperate because he believed they were the ones most likely to be affected by this probability. Leah then spoke about the second type, those not guided by the terrain. She noted they had been on the right path, but halfway through they began to doubt and went the wrong way. He realized he had just tried something similar, so the girl reminded him what he was starting to forget. Leo Watt walked past Gil and said this was what had happened, and that the main thing was to see it through so everything would work out. The young man still had doubts because they might reach the end and find nothing. Leah held out her hand to help him up. Lily said that in that case, they would have to turn back and find another way out. Speaking with such confidence, the girl left the man with no doubt, so he smiled and calmed down. Their conversation was cut short when a monster appeared suddenly. Not scared, she was only upset because it had broken her vehicle. The young man turned, struck once, and split the huge monster in half, destroying it again. Jill, replaying the interlocutor's words in his head, thought only that she was right, and helped him not to lose his mind in that situation. Leah began clapping to praise the young man when he quickly won another victory, which she did not doubt. Having already passed 120 levels, they saw no reason to turn back. Leah asked if Gil felt better, and he said he did. The young man bowed to Leah and said he had learned a lot from her because her experience taught her what to do. Lily smiled and said the young man should learn as much as he could from her while she was alive, and Gil smiled and nodded. After a while, the couple went through another tunnel, and then a fork appeared before her, so they had to decide which way to go. Jill and Lily pointed the same way and decided to go right. Their thoughts matched, so they were clearly right. The couple instantly agreed on the right path, and the young man used a new mode of transport to pull along a girl who didn't want to walk. Rushing forward, the couple set aside all doubts and followed a path down into a darker abyss in the lower levels, which meant their long adventure had just begun. After a while, Jill and Leah stopped to eat. They ate fish and drank clean water. The meal was short because the couple could not waste time after being in the dungeon so long, still waiting for a chance to escape. Lily ate the fish and was overcome by unpleasant sensations, saying the food was so terrible she could soon cry. The young man had long been used to such things and was glad to eat and drink, finding it gave him plenty of energy. Since Lilia arrived, the man has clean water and decent hygiene, and though both failed to start a fire, his situation has improved slightly. After they thanked each other for lunch, Lily asked Gil to hold out his hands to her, and he complied without asking any unnecessary questions. Least used the power of water to easily clean the young man's palms of dirt, smiled, and let go of his hands. The young man thanked the girl for her care, and she replied that it wasn't hard, but that she wanted to sleep now. Gil said he was going to train because he still had a lot to learn. The young man added that the level owners made it hard to get through the floors, so he should have learned to deal with them himself without asking the girl for help. Leah stared at the young man, and only after a few seconds did he realize she felt she was bothering him. Lily began to doubt that she had helped the young man enough and worried she had done something wrong, feeling she was only getting in his way, but he quickly reassured her that things were not like that. She remembered learning special spells that helped many people. She held the liquid in her palm. He had earlier mistaken it for water, but she invited him to drink it without purifying it again. Gil explained that he didn't want to keep relying on others because he needed to work harder to improve his own skills. The young man added that any swordsman who wanted to improve felt the same, since relying on someone else made it impossible to grow stronger. When Jill finished, Leah said she had only been joking and understood all the guy's motives, so she held no grudge against him. The young man exhaled in relief, and the girl called him cute. He remembered his mentor, who had called him too cocky. Lily also reminded Jill to address her informally because she preferred it that way. Saying she liked to tease younger boys, the girl then calmed down, reminded herself she was going to sleep, and wished the young man good night. As Leia began to fall asleep, the young man left her at the shelter and went the other way to begin his training. As they walked, Gil said he had problems with Lilia because she constantly teased him and did not take him seriously. After going far enough away, the man could only think about his problems and his new friend. The point was the young man knew he would soon fall in love with Lily, which made his face go red. Her presence kept him from concentrating on training because he was beginning to feel sympathy for Leah. Remembering his mentor's words, he recalled that the man had told him to stay away from women because the mentor had been divorced 5 times and spoke from bad experience. When the young man heard those words 5 years ago, he believed a man who had already been divorced 5 times could not be telling the truth. When Jill expressed doubts, his mentor put him through the toughest training so the boy would have to listen. Remembering the man's words, the young man began to avoid relationships with women, though he knew this would not last forever. After 3 lonely months wandering a dangerous, filthy dungeon maze, the guy met a girl who seemed to shine in his eyes. Living alone with Leah in a place like this for a month, the young man found he was beginning to like her, and he could not do anything about it. The young man had never felt anything like this, and the master had already given his opinion. After the man injured his back and could no longer be Jill's guardian, He told Jill to continue on his own. When the man began walking alone, everyone assumed he was his master's disciple. That was not good. When people heard Gil wanted to kill a dragon, they all wanted proof that he could do it. As a result, he often fought duels to show his skill, made friends that way, but those friends eventually left him. Remembering his past, the young man realized he had never had a chance for a happy future, but he did not give up. Leah always took Jill's hand when he finished eating, and his heart began to pound because Lily smiled afterward. To calm himself, the young man began to meditate. With the barrier the girl had placed keeping the dragons away, they had a good chance to train without interruption. The young man couldn't shake the thought that confessing his feelings to Lily in that setting would seem terrible. Imagining a similar situation, he realized he literally would not have given the girl a choice and would have acted like a villain, so he pushed those thoughts away. Gil expected that once they left the dungeon he could stay in touch with Leah, and after a year he would try to confess to her. Plunging into meditation, the young man sought to expand the inner power that reached every corner of his body, letting it fill him without clogging and sharpening it into a keen edge. The man again thought the girl might be around 80, since she was clearly older than 20. Clergy usually hit their peak at a respectable age, so a girl couldn't be that skilled at 20. He also felt he couldn't even make out her face because his eyesight was poor. Leah only held Jill's hands to clean them with a spell, so he could not win her interest. The young man was so desperate he accepted he would be rejected after hearing the confession, and a tear ran down his face. Lily appeared behind the man who had approached him, but he did not notice because he was lost in thought. Startled by the surprise, the man screamed and later apologized for the noise, and Leah said she woke up thinking he might be cold. The girl stepped closer to the young man and sent her magic toward him, but did not touch Jill as she usually did. Leah smiled, sat beside him, and began to cast a spell to keep him from freezing. When she finished, Lily said this would be enough for 10 hours and told the young man not to overexert himself and to go to bed as soon as possible. As the girl began to leave, Gil decided to ask why she didn't have to touch his hands this time to cast magic. She said she could use it without touching someone because her skill let her. After saying goodbye, Lily left, and the man was puzzled because he couldn't understand why she had touched him earlier if she had no reason to. Thinking back on all his interactions with Leah, Gil could not decide what to make of her now because she was acting strangely. Watching Leah, the young man clenched his fists as his body trembled and questions started forming in his mind. Thinking again about whether Lily was an old woman, he found it mattered less and less to him each time. Memories flooded her, and she remembered the face of the person who helped her, but what happened to Gil afterward haunted her. She could not imagine something like this happening to the young man. Seeing him fall, she screamed because she could not help him at that moment. She remembered the young man calling her name and abruptly opened her eyes, waking in her bed. She woke from another dream about that fateful day and still blamed herself for being helpless, even after 4 months. After the squad left the dungeon, Claudia's life remained unchanged, and there was no word from the Holy Night Squad. As she ran past the houses, the girl remembered the young man, but it felt like a dream and nothing had happened to him in the maze. Claudia felt she was trapped in a long, terrible dream that only she remembered. And each day was like the one before, with only nature reminding her that autumn was ending. When Claudia paused to rest, she heard someone call her name, so she got up and looked at the man. Humblin stood a short distance from Claudia, who waved to her. The girl asked why the man had come, and he said he had taken the children out for a walk. They asked their father to go with them, so he went out with them, but they drifted apart a bit. About halfway, the children fell behind him, so he stopped and waited for them. Holding a pillow, she placed it on the bench, sat down to rest, and began warming up her muscles. After she finished, Claudia showed no sign of tiredness, as if it were routine for her, while the man yawned from lack of sleep. The man praised the girl's fitness, then asked how she was doing, and Claudia said she usually ran about an hour every day. The girl said she did 5 sets of 10 reps, varied the distance without cutting corners, and tweaked the program a little every day. For example, rather than strength work, she focused on endurance like climbing a mountain. Holotten smiled and said the girl would certainly become a good adventurer, though people probably did not like hearing that from him, and Claudia looked confused and said that was not true. The man said he did not need to overwork himself, and that you can always go to church to be cured, but you should not abuse it. When Hulud mentioned the priests, a cart passed through the crowd that likely belonged to the church. The man said the church members began each day early to look after ordinary people in the morning. Klaha understood. Holland seemed about to say more, but paused and lit a cigarette to gather his thoughts. Exhaling, the man said everyone had learned that the church's followers were interested in the dungeon where guilt disappeared. Luxury carts rarely appeared on the streets near the dungeons, but they started showing up about a month ago. Klaha said when she saw the armored men. They did not identify themselves as church servants, so she assumed they were just knights, and the man said he had no idea the church had such people. No one thought the holy knights were into risky business, so it was unclear why they had come. Holland said he hoped church affairs would not affect ordinary people because that could be dangerous. Klausha barely had time to tell Holland what she'd done before the man's children ran up to them. The guy and the girl were very tired and had no strength, so they complained that their father was moving too fast. The man laughed warmly and began to cheer his children on because they were still managing the task. Hyland told Klaha that lately he could not shake his fear of anything bright and right. He stroked his daughter's head and said he had long felt that at some point, everything in this world had lost all meaning. After speaking, the man told the girl not to take his words to heart and urged her to train harder, saying she would succeed. Clasping her hands behind her back, Klaha thanked Holland for his words and said she would certainly try. Later that night, a cat came to the girl's door. Klabaha was surprised, but opened the door to check on the visitor. Arlene stood in front of her, the church's holy knight. The girl apologized for arriving late and went into the house. Klafaha received the knight's thanks for her hospitality and for giving her tea. A blonde-haired girl sat down next to him. The girls fell silent, and the house grew quiet as the knight seemed to gather her thoughts to say something. Clevwall remembered seeing Arlenate earlier, standing beside Lilia and looking worried, but did not know why she had come. That night, she finally asked what happened to the future plan in the dungeon 4 months earlier. Arlene said the group refused to enter a difficult maze that no one could escape from. But that was not true. Klop Halahaw had heard about it but refused to accept it. That night, she also asked Godaki for details about that day. The man said nothing, and only replied that his group would not go through the dungeon, so Arlene came to Klaha. The knight wanted to know why the S-rank group's leader had so readily refused to enter the dungeon on the first attempt. The dark-haired girl said Gudaha told her nothing happened in the dungeon, and no one died. Klaha froze on hearing that. The man also said errors in the registration lists meant no one knew what happened to Gil since he was not listed with the group. Arlene said she did not understand Godaki's motives for refusing research. Klaha saw that Godaha had achieved his goal by removing Gil, so he refused to continue the research. The man planned from the start to kill the young man, but the girl missed the main point. Why didn't she understand it? Remembering Gotahaz's expression, Klinghaz was horrified by his own treachery, and Arlene, noticing the girl tense, called out to her. Klaja hesitated to tell the truth, so she asked whether Arlenate herself had seen anything strange in the dungeons. The knight answered that Lilia, one of the 4 holy virgins, had vanished in the maze because of a displacement trap. Klykolaha remembered her right away, since they'd spoken before entering the dungeon. Arlenade suspected something was wrong with the maze. Inside the dungeon, the holy virgins searched for the Brotherhood's origin, so the holy knights were extremely cautious. Yet no one could help Lilia when she disappeared. Strangely, the trap was triggered the moment the holy virgin stepped on it. The trap was set to activate with a specific object, but Klauha had never heard of it, since such complex mechanisms could not exist. The trap targeting specific people was hard to believe, but Arlene knew how that sounded. The knight replied that mistakes without explanation could not be prevented, so people began to doubt that the maze was easy. Arlene again asked Flehaw to tell her everything that had seemed strange to her that day in the dungeon. The rest of the group stayed silent, so only Klaha could say what happened that day, since he had not given her any peace of mind. Arlene remembered this girl asking to save someone, or at least find a body, while talking to Lilia. The knight would not relent and forced the truth out, so Clayhab began to remember everything that had happened. Chloe Haas looked at her companion and gathered her thoughts, knowing this was another chance to change everything. Later, the girl had lunch at an establishment near her house. She met a man that day whom she found very handsome, but she did not know who he was. The young man had striking dark hair and long eyelashes, but it was hard to tell if he was truly male or female. The man stood in front of the table where Klaha sat. At first he said nothing, then he raised his voice. Unsure how to act, the girl moved over and gave in as soon as the guy asked her to sit next to her. The man apologized for the inconvenience and began flipping through the menu while Klaja ate her lunch in silence, lost in thought. Seeing the stranger, Klauha remembered Arlenate, who had come to her, and noticed she was also very beautiful. After a while, the young man turned to the girl sitting next to him to pull her out of her thoughts. Stepping closer, the stranger wondered which dish here was the tastiest. Clayhaw said the hamburger steak would be a good choice for a first-time visitor because it is the specialty. The young man asked what advice the girl would give if he had been to the institution before. Kladha thought the person speaking to her had a very strange manner. After a moment's thought, the girl replied that all the meat dishes here tasted very good. The signature dish had 3 steaks and plenty of rice, so it should have been enough for anyone to eat. Klaukawa looked at the man and said the dish would seem too large for someone with a small appetite. But the stranger was not confused. The young man said he would like to try the signature dish and called the waiter. He did not wait for anyone to approach him, so he asked for 2 specialties for himself. The server was stunned by the request, and the owners saw it as a challenge. 1 serving could satisfy even the hungriest person, so the owners were sure this order would be too large for the visitor. Quickly preparing 2 large portions, he put all his effort into confirming every rumor about the signature dish. Platt Howd tried to warn that if someone ordered dishes and did not finish them, the owners became very angry. But she ran out of time. 2 large servings of the signature dish were brought to the table where the couple sat, and a bowl of rice looked big enough to feed a dozen workers. Nothing bothered the young man. He smiled and was glad everything was ready for him so quickly. The owners were sure one person could not eat 2 large portions, and when Klaha saw how big the portions were, he began to worry about the stranger. The owners started to leave before the young man admitted his mistake, and he raised his voice. Turning to Klaha, he told her not to worry about him because he was sure of his desire. Smiling, the young man picked up his chopsticks and prepared to eat everything in front of him. All the visitors at the institution watched the spectacle, since no one could imagine that such a slender young man could eat so much. After he finished, the young man said the signature dish was delicious, and the owners admitted they were wrong. After asking for another serving of noodles, the man asked why the woman ate so little, and she said she just had no appetite. The young man stood up to leave and told Klinefa she did not seem like a bad person, which surprised her. The stranger said nothing more and simply smiled at the blonde girl. He thanked Klahau for recommending something delicious, left the money, and headed for the exit. As he left, the young man smiled again and promised to do whatever was needed without sparing any effort. The man holds a smiling girl's fingers, but something distracts him and he looks back. They sit on a large flat stone in a cave. A man in a jacket with long black hair and a smile approaches them, looks at them, and greets them. The girl says he's human and thinks he's a good person, while the man asks how he could be here and says he must be lost too. He insists this can't be happening. Someone tells them not to worry. Smiling, he rests one hand on his forehead and points the other at them. He says his name is Eunice and is clearly not planning anything suspicious. The guy and the girl fall silent and watch him. Then the guy says he's somehow suspicious, and the girl agrees. Eunice stares at them, dumbfounded. All 3 sit around the campfire, and Eunice asks the main character if he broke his glasses and can no longer see other people's faces. The main character says yes, and Eunice says it's no surprise he didn't recognize him. The bond fire still burns as the protagonist and the girl beside him watch the flames without looking away. They both repeat the word bonfire, then the girl calls Jill's name and he asks what she wants. Smiling, the girl tells Gil there's finally a fire in their small shelter. The main character holds his nose, calls it a great happiness, and then begins to laugh. Jill admits he hasn't been this happy in a long time. The girl laughs, says she feels the same, and they both laugh. Eunice smiles at the cheerful men, then holds up her hand to signal them to stop. He watches Jill and the girl go to bed. Eunice asks them to wait a little while so he can finish, then go to bed. The girl says the fire will go out. Eunice says he can light a new one for them at any time. Eunice stands up, holding her chin thoughtfully. He has an idea and asks the others what they think. They keep watching him while lying prone, and Eunice mentions Kurok, a member of the group, the plan of the future, and the captain of the 4th squad of the Holy Knights of Arlene. Jill and the girl sat down. The girl asks Eunice how he knows the station's name. Eunice asks if they are interested in him. He places a hand over his heart, smiles, and talks about himself, saying his name is Eunice, that he is the archmage of the stars and that he is on his own. The men stare in surprise. Jill asks again about the archmage, and the girl asks if he is famous for being the youngest archmage in history. Eunice confirms that everything is correct. The main character admits he's a bit surprised. Eunice says that since they're all about the same age, he expected them to know each other better. Eunice looks at the guy and calls him the great poison dragon slayer, Jill. The guy looks at the girl and calls her Lily, a saint who saves the islands. Jill and Lily stare at the man in silence. Then they look at each other and point with their fingers, with Jill asking about the saint and Lily asking about the great killer. Eunice keeps looking at them and pointing with her fingers. Then he keeps smiling and looks at them questioningly. He asks how they could know absolutely nothing about one another after spending so much time together and what they have been doing for so many days. Jill thinks for a moment, then tells them they were fishing. He also remembers how they drank delicious water and fought with their fingers. Eunice looked at Jill and Lily without smiling this time. He suddenly beamed and smiled again and said it sounded fun, and the protagonist thought he was an oddball. Jules asks Eunice how he ended up here, and Eunice says it was much easier for him than for them. Eunice remembers placing his hand on a drawn diagram and says he used the magic circle that teleported Saint. Lily here from the 4th floor, then followed the trail. Lilia is surprised by this. Eunice looks at the guys, points at them, and says he should be the one surprised, not them. They decided mere survival wasn't enough, and they could descend to that depth only together. Jill and Lily listen to him silently. Eunice says it seems the rumors that their abilities are unmatched were true. Lilia holds her head and laughs. The main character looks at the girl, then raises his head and makes only the sound B. The girl looks at him with a questioning expression. Jill screams, asking whether the girl can see, and says that he knew they were down. Lilia stares at him in disbelief, tells him to view it as a valuable experience he has earned, and Jill asks whether Lilia intends to use it against him now. Stunned, Lily can't answer, but then she starts talking to him anyway. She reminds him he agreed with her on everything, so it's not just her fault. Lilia says everyone must take responsibility for their own actions. Words keep hurting the god. Already on the ground, the protagonist is lying as Lily watches him in silence. Afterwards, the man apologizes and admits she was right. Lilia says that's better. Lying on the ground, the main character realizes he was the first to go the wrong way. He remembers holding a round inscribed stone with Lily. They are equally responsible for being here. Everything that happened before was entirely his fault. He worries about what will happen if Lilia remembers. If she remembers this, the main character will probably have to crawl on his knees. Lilia is deep in thought. Lilia remembers everything and tells Gil he was the first to go the wrong way. But the man cuts her off and shouts to Eunice that he is here to save them, then insists he is and immediately objects. Eunice says he thought they'd run into the boss from several floors up and couldn't get past him, leaving them at a disadvantage and never imagining they'd be this deep. He tells them not to mention they wanted to clear this dungeon alone, which Jill denies. Eunice smiles and admits he is even embarrassed to have been wrong. Jill is screaming again, denying something. Eunice, dazed, looks at the main character lying on the ground and tells him they did not want to. Tearfully, Jill begins to speak about the direction, and when Eunice asks him again, she says, they only have topographical cretinism with Lily standing behind. Eunice stares at the guys in disbelief, arms outstretched. After that, he asks them what they are talking about. Jill, leaning on her hands, says they had been trying to get out all this time, but instead they kept sinking deeper and deeper. Awkwardly glancing to the side, he asks if she thinks it's funny and tells her not to laugh, and he adds that he wouldn't really want it. Then she laughs loudly and he says he wasn't addressing her. Eunice watches the others in silence. Then Jill calls his name. The main character apologizes and says he thought it was an interesting coincidence. The man says he realized that both of them truly have topographical creatinous. Jill says so, but Eunice came down here himself and smiles quietly at the guy. The protagonist asks them to stop, saying he has a bad feeling. Eunice says it is unrelated and adds that he knows them both. He recalls a poisonous dragon, telling how the hero swordsman defeated it after it tried to poison an entire forest and terrorize the eastern countries, and Lily, the saint who saved a whole island from flooding. Eunice remembers the massive waves and says she built a barrier to protect everyone from the raging storm. Lelia says her master was with her then. Jill admits he received help from the islanders. Eunice says she wants to know whether they know anything about him. He keeps holding up his finger and pointing at them. Lelia considers it and says he is somehow connected to the stars. The main character says Eunice is the youngest archmage in history, and that is all he remembers. Lelia keeps thinking, asks Eunice if he created a new kind of magic, and he says that's correct. He runs his finger through the air, and a pattern appears. Strict rules define what counts as a new kind of magic. Even if they don't realize it, that will be enough to surprise them. Eunice sits on his lap, while arc-shaped patterns form around them, and he is thinking about how to explain it. The patterns form circles. If Eunice had been as humble as they were, he would have said he got this far only because of an early meeting with his teacher. He thinks they could have told him the most important thing, but they interrupted. The main character shouts the man's name. The man stares in disbelief and asks if he can help them, because he doesn't understand what Eunice is saying. Eunice says he'll simplify everything in this case. Eunice's magic draws power from the stars. The main character is unhappy. Eunice smiles and says they realized he is one of the few who bears the proud title of Archmage, and even in a place like this where starlight cannot reach, he can still use some of his power. The main character watches him in silence, trying to understand his words, while Eunice smiles at him. He says he should at least use his power. Without warning, Jill opens her mouth wide. Jill stares at the man with angry eyes and asks him to get to the point. The main character clutches his chest and says his heart feels like it is about to burst. Eunice asks if this is true. Offering his hand, he says he'll be happy to help. The man gestures and says he's only at 20% strength here and completely useless. The main character lifts his head, then falls to his knees and screams, asking what all this is for. Jill still holds her head with her mouth open. A swordsman, he has a distorted sense of space. Lily looks at him and thinks he's very moody. Though saintly, she doesn't know how to react in the moment. Eunice smiles as he tries to work out what went wrong. In this situation, he is a useless magician. A whole group of worthless people, and if this were bingo, we'd have a full house and everything would be fine, but it's not, so things are bad. The adventure goes on. Footsteps land on the water. Eunice asks the guys if they've been stuck on this floor for almost 3 weeks. Jill says they've already tried everything, but nothing works. All three walk forward. Waves ripple across the water below them. The main character knocks on the wall with his knuckles. He looks at the guys and says that's the problem, and Eunice glances slightly above the guy and is surprised by something. Eunice sees a huge stone slab in the wall ahead, painted with patterns, and wonders whether it is a massive door. The three of them stare at her. The protagonist says striking her with a sword changed nothing. Eunice asks about it again. Lelia says it didn't work. She says it's like a magic circle carved into the door, but she can't see it clearly because she's completely black. Lilia keeps staring at the door. The girl asks Eunice if he could help her. He smiles and says he can easily help her, and flashes of light appear around him as the water beneath him starts to move. Figures rise out of the water behind the man, and the main character looks at them in surprise. The man looks at these figures, already several times taller than the people. The main character asks him what it is. Eunice thinks for a moment, and says it is just an ordinary spell. Water soaks the door. He reports filling the surface depressions with water. Then he transferred the resulting cast to the ground so the shape stayed the same, as if turning a page. Lilia studies the watery imprint of the door spread across the ground. Eunice looks at the magic circle and thinks about what kind it is while Lily stands behind him. Eunice suddenly realizes something and opens her eyes. Jill looks surprised at the man. Eunice says he knew it. He asks the guys if they really don't get that they're here by chance, and the girl places her hand on the circle. The girl denies it, and Eunice looks at her and says he doesn't think it was an accident. Lily studies every pattern in the circle and admits she never imagined she'd find something like this here. The apocryphal magic circle and the beast. Eunice says someone apparently built this maze. Lilia and Joe listen intently to him. It was built by someone linked to the fallen king. 2 books have painted covers. In the religion of Raste, Writings considered sacred but not part of the canon are called apocrypha. In the dark, an eye emerges from white lines. The apocrypha is not meant to entertain readers with fairy tales. White lines radiate outward from the eye. The apocrypha gives a detailed account of one who lived in the ancient days of the fallen king and of a great disaster that threatened to destroy the world. Also mentioned is his battle with the apostle of God, Rusty. The girl points the staff at the white lines and light pours from it. Eunice snaps her fingers, smiles at Jill and Lily, and invites them to take stock. Pointing at them as they sit in front of the magic circle, the man admits they both have a terrible sense of direction. The main character tells him the man would not even try to escape from here alone. Smiling, Eunice tells the guys not to worry because he is now part of such a fun company. He tells them that for the past 4 months, they have been wandering the maze, either going the wrong way or, conversely, starting here from the very beginning, and during that time they also defeated several floor bosses. Lilia says everything is clear to her. Jill looks at the man, who has no idea what's going on here at all. Eunice says they are apocryphal beasts. Silhouettes are drawn on the circle and move toward the person. They are the beasts the fallen king used in the battle with Rusty, and some believe they were part of the fallen himself, but that detail can be left out. Eunice stands in front of the door and reports that people say he was so strong it took an entire army to defeat even one because he could match the strength of a whole country. And Jill listens to him. The protagonist asks the man about the whole country and, looking dissatisfied, says it is quite possible. Lily sits in the back. Pointing at Jill, she asks him if he thinks it is an exaggeration. He awkwardly replies that he is not saying it is all a lie. She pokes his cheek with her finger. The girl recalls the beast Guild defeated and says the horse he cut was called Nightmare. Lilia asks the man how he would react if told it was only a small animal. The man looks surprised. Shocked to learn he is still a kid, he hears the girl ask if he understands now. The protagonist pulls Lily's hand away from him and asks whether these animals were here. Eunice listens to them. The man says he thought the apostle destroyed them during his childhood long ago. Jill says there is some truth in every rumor, for example, that some animals remain here or that the fallen king built this maze. Eunice thinks that is pretty close to the truth. Looking at the monster drawings, he tells the main character that at least some traces remain here. Eunice studies the carving and says the magic circle in the door is also mentioned in the Apocrypha. Lilia takes Jill's hands, looks at Eunice, and asks him if he knows this is pure magic, noting she has seen it several times before. He says he believes Rusty used the magic circle, recorded only in the original scripture and in 7 apocryphal copies. He asks Lilia whether she is unwilling to be his apostle to help him grow up. The girl says she does not like it. Looking up at the door, Lilia says this magic circle is slightly different. This is no ordinary protective spell. It simply keeps outsiders out and also holds back whatever is on the other side of the gate. The protagonist waves his wand and says that in any case, if Rusty cast this spell, it's better not to destroy it. Yuma corrects her, and Jill looks at him questioningly as he explains there must be a key that will let you dispel the spell. Lilia says she agrees. The main character pictures a key in his mind. Thoughtfully, Eunice says that someone of Rusty's level, though it was unclear if she was even a person, could create a perfect magic circle. Although this spell is extremely complex, it was crafted so someone who has mastered holy magic at a certain level can still dispel it, so it must be destroyed. Jill looks at Eunice, who thinks about what it all means, and says the maze is linked to the fallen king. Standing before the circle, he says he has become a checkpoint through which Rusty herself or any other magic user can pass, meaning people who clearly do not serve the fallen king, and Eunice will tell you what it means. Lillian Jill watches the man, waiting for him to explain while he stands before them, taking his time. He spreads his arms and says he has no idea what that means. On hearing that, Jill falls face first into the water. All wet, Jill moves to the side and says he's gone to sleep. Eunice holds him and reassures him it's just a harmless joke. Lily laughs. Eunice grabs the main character with both hands and is dragged along behind him. Lilia says Eunice is right about one thing, that they don't know what they don't know. Eunice turns and says they simply have no clues. The man turns to the main character, asks if he is an adventurer and what he knows, then turns around. Eunice keeps holding him and asks whether he learned anything about the maze before he went down into it. The main character says he knows nothing, and Eunice keeps asking if he studied the layout. Jill tells Eunice to stop because he has never been an adventurer. He was only hired to help and heard there are very strong monsters in this maze. Lily watches them. Stone columns rise. Unison shapes the main character so he looks like he doesn't even have an adventurer's license. The main character suddenly screams and calls out Yomini's names, then in anger abruptly sits down on the ground. Jill, looking angry, calls Eunice rotten. Eunice laughs and says that because he went into the forbidden area, he'll be fined as soon as he leaves. Lilia says she feels even worse for him. The guy starts to cry. Eunice pauses and frankly admits this is also very strange. Lilia agrees. Jill asks them to stop since they've been talking about it for a long time. The girl says he knew too much, as if he meant to do this to Jill from the start. Eunice thinks about those words. The girl looks at the main character and asks if he has any idea why it happened. The angry man asks how he even knows that. The main character recalls 2 people, then says he has no memory of anything that could have made him lie. Eunice says he can hardly believe that Jill is just unhappy. The main character asks him why he thought that. Lily and Eunice look at the man, and Eunice says she still thinks it's possible that Lily and I were thrown here on purpose. He tells Gil that he is the greatest swordsman of their era and too important to be here by accident. But the man protests that this is an exaggeration and says he is not that strong because he never managed to defeat his teacher. Eunice says she doesn't know, but thinks his single-handed defeat of the apocryphal beast makes him one of the strongest. He is embarrassed. Eunice remembers that on top of everything else, he wasn't even fighting at full strength because he had no points. Jill asks him to stop. If he keeps going, a hermit master will come and beat him for thinking he's one of the strongest, and 2 big men call him arrogant, making it doubtful anyone should be called a man who can defeat the apocryphal beast. Eunice wonders if he spent 4 months in the toughest maze, since he is clearly stronger than when he first entered. Embarrassed, the guy says he fought a lot and thinks so, then suddenly looks at his finger. He bends down and bangs his finger on the stone, saying pride is his enemy. Lilia and Eunice agree. Jill holds her swollen finger and asks whether it is fashionable to mock him now. Eunice steps in and suggests Lilia stop teasing Gil for now, and Jill screams, asking how they dared to play with his self-esteem. The man says many things still bother him, so he wants to offer something. Lilia treats Gil's finger, and Gil asks Eunice what the man means. Eunice asks the guys if they could all go through the gate together. Jill and Lily are looking at him. Eunice stands with her arms outstretched before the main character, who looks at him, waiting for her to explain. Jill thinks he originally came here to conquer and briefly thought of turning back, but instead kept going deeper. If he had said he wanted to return to the surface right away, it would have shown weakness. The man clenches his fist and tells Eunice he is in business, since this was the original plan, and Eunice smiles, asks about Lily, and says if they stay any longer everyone will start to worry. The main character tells Lily she does not need to worry because he had planned ahead, expecting they might be a little late. Lily looks at him, puzzled. He remembers bending down in front of a woman. The man had told Arlene in advance that their adventure could take a while and told her not to worry for at least 6 months. Lilia thanks the man for that. Lily and Jill looks at Eunice, who tells them that since they're so far in, it will be faster to go down to the bottom before exiting the maze. Jill thinks it over and realizes teleporting straight to the exit is a good idea. Eunice says that's what he was talking about. A man points to a spot on the floor where something glitters, and at the maze's deepest level lies its heart, a sea of mana, a group with a magician can use to cast a teleportation spell. Eunice puts her hand on herself and says, they just happen to have such a magician, and Lilia raises her hand, adding that in that case she is in business. Glancing aside, he says, the maze is strange. The 3 saints asked him to explore it from the inside, but he hasn't had the chance, and he notes that no one knows how much time and effort it would take to go that deep again. He warns they probably won't get another chance to assemble such a strong group. Jill asks what he means by that. The main character smiles and asks whether Eunice wants them to figure everything out by themselves. Lilia smiles and says she and Gil reached that depth easily. Eunice presses her hand to her heart and tells them he is with them now, so together they will be invincible. Looking up, he says that besides the saints sensing negative energy here, The Magic Federation made many ominous predictions, and when he came down, he found apocryphal beasts and a magic circle. Eunice says he will now be unable to shake the feeling that something terrible is about to happen. He bows his head before the others and asks if they can help him. Lilia smiles at him. Taking his hands, the girl thanks him for coming to his aid and looks forward to working with him. The main character says he is also very grateful to him because if he had not shown up, they would still be wandering aimlessly through the maze. Jill sighs, and then wonders whose sense of direction will now decide the path. Eunice and Lily are about to play rock, paper, scissors, but the main character in shock tells them to stop. Jill waves his hand away and tells him he cannot play this game with them. The girl asks why, and he says he won't be able to see what they show at all. Eunice tells the guy he can just touch our hands in this case. The main character says this lets them change their choice easily before he touches them. Lilia and Eunice exchange glances. Jill says he knew they were up to something. The others object, and one of them says it's not fair. They accuse him of not trusting his friends at all. Jill realizes she does not want that responsibility. After giving such an inspiring speech, the main character knows that if he leads them to the wrong place, he will be blamed for the failure. He shouts for them to stop and says they should decide together where to go because he does not want to be responsible alone. The girl objects and says Gil himself said not long ago they were lost because of him. Those words hurt the guy. The main character tilts his head back as Eunice looks at him and asks to speak frankly. Eunice loudly declares with complete confidence that he is useless at this, and the main character admits he is useless too. The main character asks why they accused him then. The girl replies that it was because he led them, and a man reaches out and says he has an idea. He suggests they split up, and then all come back to the same spot. They stare at him in silence. The main character, wearing a serious expression, tells them the first person to return here will lead everyone. Eunice and Lilia watch him in silence. After that, Eunice will share her view on the matter. Stone turrets hang overhead. Eunice says it sounds incredibly exciting. Jill counts down and runs ahead. Eunice and Jill are already standing together. She rejoices at Lily's arrival, and Jill says he thought he'd never see her again. The tired girl looks up at the top, holding her walking stick. Eunice finished first in just 4 hours. Jill finished second in 5 hours. Lilia finished last in almost 9 hours. Lilia drops to her knees, folds her hands in front of her, and begins to cry, saying she is so happy to have returned safe and sound. A tear ran down Eunice's cheek as he said this was amazing and the true pinnacle of human development, and he applauded while wondering if there were more useless people in the world than he was. Meanwhile, Jill is happy everyone could return and that he finished in second place. The rest of the group accused the main character of being too fickle and not attractive enough. The man shouts that this is slander. The next day, symbols on a huge door began to glow, and everyone stood before the door that had once blocked their path as it creaked open to reveal the maze's darkest depths. The main character stands on a stone in the rain, looks up at the sky, and asks if he is even needed here as Lily and Eunice watch him. They now look at him, puzzled. They are between the rocks. Another month passed, and the adventure went better than expected. At first, the guys were polite. Eunice smiles and asks to follow them the first time until he gets used to everything, and Jill and Lily agree. Unison tells Guild she saw a monster there. The main character says he'll figure it out now, then screams and swings his sword at the monster. The protagonist cuts the monster apart, and Lily smiles, staring at the man in astonishment. Eunice soon adapted to everything. The main character intends to kill the monster with a sword, but magic kills the monster in front of him. Waves stream from Eunice's hands as he faces the group. Jill waves a sword and says he seems stronger. Lilia calls it a great job, and he smiles at the praise. Magical patterns of unis appear in the air as the guide tells the rain to clear their path. The guys look up expectantly as Eunice points upward, then a few drops fall to the ground. The rain later comes down in full force, and the apocryphal animals, terrified, die. Eunice stands contentedly, looking up at the sky and the rain he created. Lily's main character is also getting wet in that rain. Gil released his hold on his head and says that thanks to Eunice's magic, they haven't fought any monsters lately. Eunice asks if that's a bad thing. The man replies that he hasn't drawn his blade in several days. The main character starts to cry and realizes he is now completely useless. Lily stands silent and Eunice looks at him, puzzled. The girl says that if you think about it, her protective barrier isn't really necessary anymore. Monsters still don't reach them. Eunice himself can use something similar. A protective barrier surrounds them from above. Lilia says that because they both use the same spells, they seem interchangeable. Jill cries and says that now it's mentioned. The name of his secret sword technique reminds her of the moon and is closely linked to the stars. Eunice presses her hands to her chest and begins to cry, asking them to stop saying such sad things. Jill and Lily stare at the man in shock. He still smiles afterward, points at the others, apologizes for feeling a bit deprived, and they tell him he gets discouraged easily. Everyone is starting to move forward. Eunice says he thought it was inevitable and was looking forward to meeting the two of them. He looks up and admits to them this is the first time he's been out with someone nearly his own age. He's overjoyed and admits he's so happy inside he can barely contain himself. It feels like they're on an outing. Lilia cheerfully calls him a cutie. Eunice clenches her fist and asks the guys if they've ever been camping. Lilia says she was, and it left her very tired. The main character asks whether they are having a picnic and then confirms that they are. Lily and Eunice face opposite directions. The girl says she even visited the Great Library as a child. Eunice says he never had anything like that. The main character looks at the man and asks whether he attended a school that admits students very young, and Eunice denies it, saying that in his memory none of his peers ever made it there. He remembers how rarely people his age stood in front of others. Everything was different for him. He managed to enroll thanks to his teacher's connections, and it was rare for someone his age to be at the heart of such an institution. The girl smiles and asks him if this was his first trip, saying it must have been very exciting. Eunice replies that it is. They stand with their hands raised. Eunice says he wants to scream with happiness right now. Jill tells them not to relax. This is the hardest maze. He looks up and remembers saying they now have 3 times the combat power he had back then. He says he can't relax here or tell the guys he wants to join them. The 3 of them are standing happily. Eunice says there's nothing you can do about it. Objectively, they are the best in their fields, and he is not exaggerating when he calls them the strongest band possible. If they still make it through this maze, humanity will have to reach the peak of its abilities, and Eunice would even call the current state of affairs natural. It would be strange if they did not hold back. Lily tells the man with a smile that he clearly loves to talk. The man admits it's because he's a narcissist. Lilia says it's obvious. The girl says the cost of their strength is a very poor sense of direction. Eunice says he is not that bad. Jill says she is the only one here with that problem. The girl says she does not want to be the only one. The guys sit around the campfire and Eunice says he wonders why the S-rank group suddenly stopped on the 3rd floor. Then Eunice eats fish and admits it tastes awful. Lilia asks him again. Eunice says that in his view they were the best of the best and should have gone deeper. The main character denies this. Jill eats fish, but after breaking away, tells the guys that the boss on the 3rd floor was too strong. Eunice and Lilia looks at the man. Someone asks whether it was really that difficult, and the man agrees, biting into the fish. Choosing his food, he looks up at the sky and remembers how, back then, he seriously thought about dying. Remembering his fights with monsters, the man says that if it was an apocryphal beast, it must be one of the strongest. Eunice asks whether Jill means that the beast was stronger than the nightmare. The man answers yes. Eunice asks him to wait because this is completely different from what he was told before. The man looks at him and then thinks it over. The protagonist says it began after his transformation. In the first phase, he was on the same level as a nightmare. What followed was truly terrifying. A man stands on a broken stone, fighting a flying monster with many arms and claws. The monster suddenly snaps its jaws. The man with glasses watches as tentacles emerge from it. The monster shifts into a far more intimidating form, and the main character realizes he has transformed. A huge ball formed in the middle of the monster like an eye. If Jill had not killed the poisonous dragon earlier and raised his rank, he would have been defeated. Lilia looks at the man and finally understands what he went through back then. Jill says he feels that if he hadn't gone through it, he would have died long ago. The bonfire keeps burning. The man says the experience felt very strange. He asks the others if they had anything like it, and they say they did. The girl says many people have never experienced it and remembers the children who kept asking whether her stories were true. She remembers trying to justify it, saying it was true, but they thought it was a lie, and because it was hard to describe, asked how she felt then. The girl appeared intimidating and admitted to the children that she had deceived them, saying she had to tell them it was all fiction, and the boy called her a liar. After careful thought, Eunice says that even though no one believed her, she still told the truth. She calls his name to pull him out of his thoughts. Eunice apologizes. He was just thinking. He says he still doesn't have reliable evidence, probably thinks about it too much, and asks others not to pay attention. Lily grows a mustache and says it's exactly what a man in a detective novel would say before dying. Jill agrees with her. The girl spots the next door ahead and points it out. The guy gets nervous and says it must be his turn now. Eunice laughs and says he was first. They argue about whose door it is and laugh. A new black door stands before the team. It is the last door to the deepest level of the most complex maze and will take 10 full days to open. The group moved on happily, but 2 days later, 2 of them lost their lives. A column of smoke rises into the sky. Next to him, a young girl wearing gloves sits, holding her knees. A girl sits among the charred ruins. A man approaches from behind and says it's a pity her house burned down. A man hands a girl a package and says it's meant for her. She reaches out, takes it, and thanks him. Standing beside her, he asks whether she is hurt. She says she is not. She was doing clerical work at the base group last night. Smoke rises from the man as he asks the girl whether the knights have investigated. She says no, and that the Holy Knight promised to look after her. A scarred man smokes a cigarette and asks if it's related, and the girl asks what he means. The man tells her he'd disappeared yesterday, and the girl stares at him in shock and asks about it again. Flicking ash off his cigarette, he tells them that everyone went looking for him but never found anything, and puts the cigarette back in his mouth. The man tells Kuraha to leave the city. Kuraha looks at him, puzzled. He says he received reports that a powerful wizard had entered the labyrinth. That wizard was the Archmager of the Stars. Their group started at A rank, but Gogodok forced him to be promoted. Honestly, the man always felt those raids were too hard for them. Things can get even worse. The man now realizes this story is far more complicated than it first seemed. Surprised, the girl asks again if the story is complicated. The man says yes. Thick smoke billows from every building. The girl asks about the rest of the group because they cannot leave. The man keeps smoking, trying to figure out what it means, and puts his hand to his face. According to him, once he took hold of the magic sword, they all became his subordinates. Looking down, the man says that even so, everyone has something they must protect, then turns to the girl and asks her not to become one of them. Karaha is not yet meant to suffer in the depths of his own desires. Someone approaches them and addresses a man named Holon. The girl with glasses says that if he feels that way, he should tell her everything. Holland is surprised by her. A girl in a raincoat stands before them. Kuraha watches her in silence, and Holland smiles while holding a cigarette. 2 men started out running somewhere, and over the years their whole group evolved into what it is today. The guys are running fast from a huge monster chasing them, and the dark-haired guy looks back. 2 men and the monster himself suddenly tumble off a cliff, and one of the men shouts for someone to take action. The magician starts conjuring circles while the other wields a staff. Magic bands wrap the monster and hold it in midair, and though they were not the strongest, strategy and teamwork let them win. The man with the bow, flying upside down, pulls the string, and when he releases it, the arrow flies toward the monster. It keeps diving down, screaming as it stares at this monster. Then someone grabs the sword's hilt. The arrow strikes the fanged beast's chin exactly, forcing it to recoil, and someone shouts, "Godok's name." The magicians look back and order Godok into battle. Then a man launches Godok into the air with his shield. Pulling the sword from behind his back, he said he understood everything, and then cut through the monster with it. The whole group is happy they defeated the beast through teamwork, and Hoglin says it was the best band possible. Hoglin smiles as he shakes Godak's hand. The man says he used to be completely different. Horland sits at a table with 2 girls, a mug in front of him, and he talks about being a good leader over the years, while one girl listens attentively. The man lifts a mug and tells them the group was at its best when it was only AB rank. The rest of the current lineup joined around the same time. They hadn't reached their full potential in other squads, and this group became a rehabilitation center for them. Holand recalls Godok's smiling partner and, with a sword on his back, says Godok was special. Kira asked Holland why he stabbed one of his comrades in the back at that time, and she remembers it. The man says it's a good question. He remembers pulling Gudok's sword from the water and is certain it all began the moment he picked up the magic sword. Memories of what came next stay with him. He holds his magic sword with both hands and examines it. Gudok's teammate shouted that it was time for him to go. Hodland looks at him and smokes a cigarette. He gives Gudok a questioning look as Gudok examines the circle on his sword. Holland reports that he is completely changed. The girls look at him, and Kuraha asks Holland where they found this sword. The man remembered the sword jutting out of the water. They found it on the middle level of the A-rank dungeon, which looked like a water surface. It was called the Face of the Ocean. The girl with glasses remembers reading about something similar in the reports. She asks the man if there was a place with very salty water, and Hulan says yes. Steam rises from the coffee. The girl says she does not understand this and asks if magic swords are found in such places. Hulan says they usually are not. If someone wants a magic sword, they go scour the ancient ruins. Holland remembers pointing with his finger at the circle on the sword, which shows cracks. The group stands before the sword. Honklin thought it was left by one of the dead. The girl asks about the sword again. He remembers the battle against a huge snake. In B-ranked dungeons like this, when a whole party dies or retreats, their items and supplies are usually left behind. Remembering the shiny diamond, he says the magic sword is too valuable for any group to have been left behind during the retreat. Surprised, Kirahal tells him his master is definitely dead, and Holland agrees. When he held the sword in his hands, the weakness that had held them back vanished, and they earned the S rank with no trouble. He stands before the corpses of the monsters he killed alone, while his teammates stand behind him and watch. The man stands with his back to Gudok. Hunlund says that since then, something has gone wrong with Gudok. The man keeps smoking a cigarette and glances back at Gudok as he walks away without turning, while Holland watches him in disbelief. Holland remembers how they would mimic each other as children while standing beside a woman. And even though he had known him for a very long time, he still had people he needed to protect. A man imagines standing beside a smaller version of himself and a 1-year-old. Then he quit the band before something irreparable happened. He remembers the circle on the sword and how he entered the room. The children scream that their dad has come and welcome him. Holland sees his whole family seated at a table with food, and a man sits with them, his sword standing behind him. She smiles maliciously and tells the man he has a wonderful family. The children eat happily with 2 chopsticks, and their mother in an apron watches them with a smile and feels joyful. Removing the sword from his shoulder, the man tells Highland he looks forward to continuing to work with him, and Highland reciprocates. Holden cradles a mug and smokes, saying that everyone has their loved ones. The girl remembers sitting on the ground surrounded by people. She asks if that was why no one lifted a finger when he attacked Jill. Holland considers it, then says he believes it is. The girl with glasses says it's not surprising no one let it slip. Kuraha raises his hand and asks if, since they asked, it's okay to tell them everything about his family. He sips from his mug, looks at the girl, then closes his eyes and thinks about her question. He reports the Holy Knights have been lingering around their house for several days, and he does not think they will just stand by if he appears. Ask whether he is right. Smiling, the girl with glasses says he has a sharp eye and reinforcements arrived a few days ago. Singing from a mug with one eye closed, Havlin then wants to ask something and sets the mug down on the table with a bang. He looks at the girl before him and asks how all these incidents connect to them. They exchange serious looks. Holland asks why the church decided to join the game. After thinking, the girl reports that the senior Holy Knights suspect the fallen king is behind it all. Kuraha stares at the girl in shock. The girl remains calm, and Holland stares at her in fear. Something is falling on the pal. The man asks what she means, holds out his hand and says it's just a fairy tale. He strains to understand how the apocryphal writings from 1,000 years ago relate to what's happening now. Kuraha, surprised, asks whether the fallen king still exists. The girl understands their confusion. Hudlin says he still has no clear answer about how the fallen king is involved in recent events. The girl with glasses says that, but the 3 saints had suggested exactly that, and she represents 3 seated girls. She represents a particular symbol and says they, like the Magic Empire, had similar predictions. Eunice stands there and tells me that one of those seers, the famous Archmage Horland, sits with his hands released. The man lifts his head and covers his face with his hand, asking them if they mean he is also somehow connected to the fallen king. The girl tells him they are sticking with this version for now. Kuroha looks at her in surprise. She studies the trembling mug. This is only a hypothesis, but if we put all the events in chronological order, the girl believes the magic sword she found belonged to the fallen king. Suddenly, Kuroha clutches the table. Rising from the table, she draws everyone's stunned looks. Kuroha notices the mug shaking again. The girl asks if they feel it too. They agree and ask what the noise is. White smoke rises in the middle of town. The whole group stood up from the table, went outside to see what was happening, and together they looked up. Harathlan stares in shock and tries to make sense of it, at first seeing only a bird's wing at the top. A huge bird soars across the sky with its toothy beak open and a clawed paw stretched forward, and everyone knows it is a mythical beast. The main character cuts the monster in half with a sword, killing it, and is surprised by how strong it was. Eunice looks at Gil, claps her hands, and says he's no use right now. Jill smiles. The main character rests the sword on his shoulder, smiles at Yumani, and says he understands him now. Several more monsters fly at Gil, so he grabs his sword. Ever since they passed through the second gate, a clear feeling lingers. Jill first kills one monster with a jerk, leaving behind a second one that looks at the... Jill kills the monster by chopping off its head. The protagonist realizes the beast has become too strong. Their level has shifted dramatically. Eunice's high-level magic is useless against them, though he is reluctant to jump to conclusions, and everyone can easily match that giant horse, making them absurdly strong compared to those they've met. It keeps cutting down monsters. If one of the beasts escaped the maze's gravitational core, it could easily destroy an entire settlement. Then Jill sighs and looks away. He then looks up and asks the guys if they agree this is a very deep maze. They pass it along and notice they are already on about the 171st floor. They want to know how many floors there are in total. They stop. The main character guesses about 200 floors. Eunice says he thinks there are 216. When asked where that exact number comes from, he says it is 6 cubed. Lilia looks up and says she thinks they are almost at the end. The guys look at her silently. Blushing, the girl says she just has a feeling. The main character grins and says the saint is referring to a premonition. Eunice laughs and agrees that's a valid point. Jill and Eunice flee an angry Lily. Jill asks the archmage what he was thinking. Eunice apologizes, saying that when he is too far from the stars, his intuition starts to fail. Eunice says he feels much better at home. The girl slaps Gil on the cheek and he falls to the ground. He lies there, thinking if this is really how an adventurer's path should be. Lilia says adventurers have a hard time. Eunice says this is definitely not a place he'd want to spend a lot of time. He would have been lost without reliable companions like Jill and Lilia by his side. The main character looks up. Jill realizes that if he had stayed with that group, he probably would never have gotten this far. Lying to himself, he insists they're not bad adventurers, but their fighting skills make it clear they lack the strength to deal with several of the beasts on this floor. They only got so deep into the maze because there were 3 of them. Jill says that in the end, it all makes sense. Lilia gives the man a questioning look after he speaks, and Jill apologizes, saying she was just thinking out loud. Lily looks at the main character and tells him he talks to himself too much. He thinks it over and is about to object when she suddenly leans toward him and says, "It's like that." Lilia uses short phrases like "I see," and "so that's why," and others. Ask whether he has already forgotten them. He says that's quite possible. Eunice smiles. Eunice, admiringly, says he's jealous and regrets he didn't join the adventure sooner, calling it childish naivety. The girl finds it rather cute, and the guy says he's always dreamed of finding friends his own age. Smiling at her friends, Lilia suggests they keep writing to each other after they leave here. The girl meets the main character's gaze and says this applies to him too. He gives her a questioning look. She smiles, and he asks whether she is telling the truth. Pointing at him, she says a heartless man has joined their cute squad. The man denies this, saying that as soon as they get out he will keep traveling, so the letters are unlikely to arrive. The girl imagines the letter moving between islands and says the guy could just tell her where he's going so she can send him straight to the local branch. Jill asks if that is possible and the girl gives a hesitant yes. Smiling, Lilia points at the main character's face and says her handwriting is so cute he will be shocked. The girl pulls her finger away and Gil rubs the spot, and Eunice, tears of joy in her eyes, asks him to do the same. He points at him and says he will send 7 coded letters a week to stall him for a long time. Jill asks him why he likes to make things so complicated. Eunice and Lilia stand before the main character, waiting for his reply. He looks confused and struggles to find the right answer. Jill says he doesn't mind in principle. Lily and Eunice begin to smile. The guys stood in front of a huge door topped by an eye and studied it. It wasn't that bad. They move on, saying that if Lilia is right, they'll get through the maze soon, and the girl says it's taken so long she can no longer feel her legs. The men raise their hands. Jill tells them not to relax too much. Eunice and Lily agree with him. One of the men places his hand on the wall and asks if they are ready. Eunice smiles while Lily points her fists forward to show him they're always ready, and he smiles back. The protagonist recalls how he fell into the abyss and starts comparing the present situation to the start of his journey. He realizes the adventure is not so bad now. The main character puts his other hand on the door. Jill presses on the door and tells Sesame to open it. His friends watch him from behind. Something is clacking in the door. The main character stares ahead in shock, sees glowing balls, and then something strikes him, severing half his body and causing him to fall. The protagonist sees an unfamiliar flash of light through the open door in the dark. The man pushes Eunice away with his hand, and she looks at him in disbelief. Eunice falls to the ground, and Jill reaches for the sword, but he has no time, and his arm is cut off. Eunice keeps falling after the push. The main character, already missing half his torso, also begins to fall. Eunice notices a dark shape in the night beside the main character. It is a bird surrounded by light. The bird opens its beak and a magic ball appears. Then the ball rushes toward Uninas, who is shocked. The monster fires a piercing beam from its beak at Uninas, but Lilia manages to protect the man just in time. Lily's face is tense as she holds her hands up to fend off the bird while stone fragments fly at her. A sharp flash suddenly lights her and she throws her head back as Eunice watches in shock. Lying on the floor, the main character looks up at the stars with a wound through his mouth. Lifting his burned hand toward the eastern stars, he commands them to prostrate themselves. A beam of light strikes the man, and he cannot stop it. The main character's head falls to the floor as Eunice keeps holding back the flash of light. A small magical orb clicks. Circles and symbols appear on the floor, forming a huge clock. Eunice couldn't hold back the monster's flash. The clock's second hand starts to shake. The second hand moved back, rewinding time by 1 second. The main character's severed head lies on the floor as he looks up and his eyes begin to close. Only one thing remained inside his body and in his fading mind. The man opens his eyes. Jill sees the white silhouette beside her and realizes it is his soul. The main character looks at her in surprise. He and his soul stare at the flash above, drawn toward a blinding light that seemed about to explode. The main character reached out his hand. Jill watches the flash of light with wide eyes. His soul stood calmly before the flash, as if Gil was trying to grasp it with his hand. He assumes the position he had imagined countless times. The soul moves forward, raises its hand, and leaves traces of itself behind. His soul lifts the sword. All this happens in a stance he has pictured countless times before. He keeps reaching for him. The protagonist's soul reaches out, and his hand finally grasps the sword's hilt. This same hand has done it countless times before. With his fingers cracked, the soul takes up a sword. The sword-wielding main character leaps forward sharply and uses his killer technique. A man runs forward and then draws a sword from its scabbard, which emits small bolts of lightning. The protagonist looks at the bird, says it's a secret sword technique, and tightens his grip on the sword's hilt. The man makes an almost invisible swing with his sword, leaving a trail. He slices the bird in half. The man raises his sword and attacks the bird again, cutting it open once more. The main character watches her without emotion, sword pointed forward. This is called the moon dream. The bird, split in two, falls to the floor beside the main character, who is kneeling. Jill places his hand on the floor, bends over, and begins to choke, tears running down his cheeks. The man with shocked eyes covers his tear-streaked face with his hand, not understanding what has just happened. All he remembers is that when the boss entered, he was caught off guard by a single attack. The man remembers the light in the dark and studies his hand while thinking about what happened. Lily's cry telling Eunice not to move pulls the main character out of his thoughts. He turns back, surprised. Jill is stunned to see a wounded Eunice lying on the floor laughing, then tells him he has fixed everything and gives him first aid. Suddenly the man feels pain after speaking and moaning. The woman says she asked him to be quiet. The main character stares at Eunice and Lily in a daze. Eunice then exhales in relief. Now he smiles broadly and says he had already been sure he was finished. All three are sitting on the floor. Eunice says he died then. Everything matches what Jill said. Pride is your enemy. A frustrated protagonist sits across from Eunice, holding his knees. Eunice says she will from now on do her best to live with humility. Jill turns to the guys and asks them what happened then. Jill stares in shock at the man who told her he had turned back time for 1 second. Lilia understands what he said and looks at him, asking if this is the new kind of magic he mentioned before. Eunice smiles and confirms that this is the main reason he was recognized as an archmage. Using his fingers, Eunice forms strips and balls and tells him this is a new technique he found on the border of the stars. He admits he usually has to pay much closer attention to the stars' positions and make many troublesome preparations, and he remembers what happened this time. Eunice smiles and says he managed to do everything with his own strength this time. He explains he can only rewind for a short time, so he's relieved that Jill defeated the boss in the second he gave him. Jill listens to him attentively. The man smiles, says he's grateful their efforts weren't in vain, and turns to Lilia. He tells her that without her protection, he could not have fully activated the spell, and the girl smiles. Pressing a hand to his chest, he says the organs he had to blow up as payment would not be restored. The main character rubs under his nose with his finger and laughs, then asks Eunice to stand up. Jill gives the man a questioning look and asks about his organs. Eunice looks at him, then understands and reminds him they are in a maze. Looking at the maze walls, he says he had to use this spell where there is no star mana. Eunice remembers activating the spell and explains that at that moment the only thing he could use was his life force. Eunice lifts her head and asks the guys if they are amazed by the result, then laughs. The man says his insight burst at that moment like a balloon, and the main character is horrified. He says that thanks to Lilia he feels great, and that people should call her a great saint. The girl smiles and agrees. With a great hero and an archmage here, she is the only one without a cool nickname, but she says she'll think of one. Lily looks up and says she can't be called that yet. Not after this, and someone starts laughing. Jill's size and fright, he says, made him think he would be left without a head, although he would have been if it had not been for Eunice. Lily, wearing a pained expression, says she's completely exhausted and doesn't want to move. Eunice smiles, lifts her head, and says it's getting quite difficult while he stares at the ceiling in silence. The protagonist thanks both friends and they stay seated together on the floor. Jill and Eunice look at the guy as he awkwardly turns away and says, "You're welcome." Gil met Eunice's gaze. Meanwhile, Eunice asked the man if he could keep defeating floor bosses as he had before. Gil was surprised by what Eunice said, shook his head to himself, and lowered his head sadly. The young man admitted he had no idea what to do in that situation. Gil frowned and said he had just defeated one of the bosses using a wake-up effect. Eunice smiled and said he understood what the guy meant. Gil asked whether they had ever had such an experience. Lilia smiled and said her strength had also improved a lot. Gil realized he could have used the time rewind again because he woke up immediately after dying. Eyes widening, the young man realized this was the third time he'd done it. This phenomenon is called knowledge. It varies for each person, but most people have heard of it before. Eunice said he had it 3 times. Lilia chuckled and said she was also part of their 3-person team. Gil thought that whether it was a moment when everything was at stake, a time of severe testing, or the moment someone realized something unimaginable. By encountering that great truth in such situations, a person gains knowledge and their abilities increase significantly. For a short time, he enters the awakening state, during which a person can usually do the impossible. Jill's strike that changed the outcome of the battle was caused by this phenomenon. Also, everyone's rank has increased. That is what let them grow so quickly and reach a completely different level. If they had kept developing at the same pace, they could have reached a similar level of strength. However, as the time required on this path decreases, having that experience greatly affects the true abilities of warriors and magicians. Eunice suggested they go back in that situation. He looked into Gil's eyes. Gil said that after gaining knowledge, a person's abilities improve greatly. He asked whether the awakening effect would fade by then. Eunice said it probably would. Lilia said she agreed. Gil realized he might have just matched his master's strength when they fought the poison dragon. The young man asked them whether they were sure they could survive facing the boss of this floor without triggering the effect. Gil said in all seriousness that he could not do it, thinking of the time a ray of light split him in two. The young man blamed his carelessness. When he reached full focus, he was swatted like a fly. The world is vast and Gil lacks experience, which he knows well. The man said that while the person is alive, there is hope, and it could take a long time for them to reach the surface. Gil lifted his head and said confidently that despite everything, it was still much better than not coming back at all. Eunice lowered his head and said he thought it was a reasonable decision and would like to make it. He turned to Lilia and asked if she knew anything, and she looked at him, surprised. Eunice asked the girl whether the floor boss Jill had killed was a mythical beast, and how strong he was. Lilia said it was an ordinary apocryphal beast. Gil was astonished by what she had just said. The girl added that in combat he was below average. Gil looked up at the top and fell silent, unable to believe what Lilia had just said and dreading what it could mean. After a while, the girl began explaining who the orcs were, saying they were a special kind, and someone asked Lilia if they were magical birds, but she said calling them just birds was enough. The girl said they were a weaker form of instas. Lilia thought they were birds, and such creatures usually come in packs. A major problem when fighting such an opponent is the lower-ranking pack members, who are extremely hard to kill. Each such bird hides behind more powerful apocryphal beasts, Lilia added, and it was all according to Rusty. The girl took up her staff, tapped its end, and said destroying the commander would make it much easier to win in this case. Eunice paused and asked whether it would actually get easier in this case. Gil, however, looked confused and didn't fully follow what Lilia was saying. Eunice smiled and asked whether Rusty had always been so open. Rusty said she would like to know too. Gil looked at them, surprised, and did not understand which bird they meant. He shouted at them to stop. The young man added that there were no bosses in the boss's office. Lilia looked at him. Gil smiled and suggested it might be a completely different species. The girl insisted she was absolutely sure of what she had said. She told him that every apocryphal animal has a number on its body that identifies its species, and this one is definitely an orcus. Gil was visibly agitated, sweat running down his face, and judged the apocryphal beast to be clearly a bit weaker than the others. Gil asked whether that was really true, then immediately laughed. The man thought he had no choice but to accept everything. Lilia stepped closer and asked Jill if he was feeling depressed right now, and he hesitated before saying he wasn't. He believed the legendary beast had defeated him easily, merely the strongest of the weak, and despite Gil's steady lessons in humility, he lowered his head, said sadly he was not depressed, and decided he had clearly overestimated his own strength. Gil's let his pride get the better of him and had no choice but to accept it. Lilia told him not to be upset. The man tried to convince her that everything was fine. Eunice said he was very cool. Some people never admit defeat and only get stronger. Jill is not one of them. He decided he needed to set aside his unreasonable pride. A guy should take that as a starting point. Gil decided to accept the fact and draw the right conclusions. After thinking, he said that even after gaining knowledge, they still could not cope with the great apocryphal beast. Lilia and Eunice listened in silence. Jilla. Eunice stepped closer and slapped the man on the shoulder. He told the young man not to lose heart. Gil said he was fine. Eunice said that in that case, it was another reason for them all to return. If they face the great apocryphal beast next time, it will be the end for them. Knowledge is not a cure-all. Even trying to fix it a second or third time will not change that. Eunice said he agreed, but there was one thing. Lily asked if he knew anything. The man thought for a moment and said yes. Eunice turned to Gil. Gil asked the man if he had said he had killed the third-floor boss. Gil stared at him in obvious surprise and said he was. Eunice added that he hadn't simply died, but that Gil had killed him himself. The young man confirmed his words. Gil said the room collapsed when he attacked with his magic ball, and while they were falling into the abyss, he somehow managed to kill the boss. They all spoke at once, saying that in that case it turned out he had fallen with Jill from the third floor and had not died immediately after leaving his home. Eunice asked if he had fought him in that situation. Gil admitted it, and they left the room while the man said nothing and suddenly fell silent. He covered his mouth and fell silent. Eunice asked if that boss had a number. Jin answered him uncertainly that he did. Gil wrote the number 55, then turned and looked directly at Eunice. Eunice turned to Lilia, and Lilia immediately said she understood. She said he is one of the weakest beasts, but he is still fairly strong. Lilia added that he was even stronger than a nightmare. Eunice lowered his head and said that, in other words, the monster Jill killed was not the third-floor boss at all. Jill was sweating profusely and amazed at what Eunice had just said. The deeper you go into the maze, the stronger the floor bosses become, and there are no exceptions. But differences in their abilities can change how hard each fight is. That means the mana in their bodies increases with each floor. So Eunice said it was extremely strange that Gil faced a similar opponent on the third floor. This is only the tip of the iceberg. Gil sat listening to him in complete disarray. Floor bosses can't leave their rooms. Eunice didn't know exactly how it worked, but that was the point of the maze. And he noticed even the average apocryphal beasts had to obey the rule. The guy added that orcas would not attack until Gil opened the door. This surprised him. Even the apocryphal beast, weaker than him, managed to escape his room, and then he transformed, revealing his true form. Eunice concluded that the most likely explanation is that the boss of the third floor is an apocryphal beast who freed himself from the labyrinth's power. Gil noticed Eunice's surprise. The man kept talking, saying the situation could be seen another way. Gil asked how. Eunice suggested the labyrinth's shackles might be loosening, and Gil said that if it was true, they couldn't maintain that much mana outside the maze, but Eunice said he had no idea. He said that long before they were born, an age of apocrypha filled the air with mana. The monsters could stay safely on the surface, and they were the natural enemies of humanity. Gil said it had been a long time and doubted Eunice truly believed something like this could happen in their reality. Eunice replied that in the worst case, yes. Gil was stunned, and his eyes widened in surprise. Eunice continued. He said the truth is that right now a mythical beast lies before them, an ancient creature straight out of the history books. Eunice tried to continue, but Gil interrupted him and said the era of the Apocrypha could happen again. He put his hands on his head and looked down. The young man asked if this possibility could be ruled out in this case. Gil couldn't make sense of the fact and wondered if it was just a bias. The man suggested the third floor might simply be special. Gil turned to Lilia and asked what she thought about all this. Lilia paused, frowned, and considered. Lilia said several pages were missing from the Apocrypha, and Gil was surprised and asked her about it. The girl said that 700 years ago, a fire at the Great Library destroyed part of the original scripture. It did not affect only him. The first 7 copies were identical. From the second manuscript onward, the wording is so vague that it is impossible to tell what was actually written. Rereading them as a child, Lilia often noticed gaps, like whether the fallen king was killed and how Rusty fought them. At last, the girl knows the whole truth. She said Rusty didn't kill the fallen king. He only imprisoned him here. Gil couldn't believe what he had just heard from the girl. Eunice smiled and said he felt the same. This place, he said, was clearly created by someone. It was built on the structure Rusty made, and the fallen king's emanations are sealed here. In this pseudo-labyrinth, Eunice suggested the description of this place might have been on the pages lost in the fire. Lilia suggested it was also possible someone had burned them. Eunice remained silent. Gil said it meant the shackles were loosening. He asked if the monsters were trying to break out in this case. Lilia said no and suggested everything was likely far more serious. The girl said in horror that the maze's seal was about to break. Jill looked up at her in surprise. Meanwhile, cracks were appearing in the seal. Gil asked whether the seal would break, looked at Lilia, and then asked what would happen if the printer failed. Eunice thought about it. He said he would not stop there because the maze still held apocryphal beasts, not just ordinary ones, but even the great apocryphal beasts they had yet to encounter. They will be released to the surface at the same time. Eunice added that if this happens, there is nothing they can do and it will be over. Lilia said there's more. If the fallen king wakes, the world will overflow with mana. The girl said that then their civilization would be destroyed, as had happened long ago to their predecessors. And Gil looked at her in horror. Gil was at a loss. He looked up and shouted that, in that case, it was another reason for them to return. The man said they could not hide such important information from the world, and Gil added they needed to find a way out of the maze and tell everyone what they'd learned. The young man saw they were all clearly strong, but that did not mean you could become the best. Gil said they had to swallow their pride and ask someone for help. The young man stopped and looked at Lily and Eunice, who lowered their eyes and listened quietly, and he felt alarmed to see them so downcast. Gil asked whether they had run out of time. Eunice said a total solar eclipse was imminent. He realized his mana density was high that day. Eunice assumed the seal would collapse at any moment, or that someone on the surface would make the first move. Gil asked again. Uni said the city also has a cathedral, and that she had always wondered why it was so huge. He said that if this is the key link that enables printing on the surface, then the following will apply. Before Eunice finished speaking, Gil cut him off and, horrified, asked if he meant that someone was planning to destroy the cathedral. Eunice said such an outcome was quite possible. Lilia said the fallen king's follower, who had eliminated the powerful swordsman beforehand, came so close to the cathedral. She suggested this was probably done to make sure their plan went through without mistakes. Gil thought of Godak. Eunice said he had screwed up with Gil after all. He said it was time for them to leave anyway, and Lilia added they really needed to move out. Eunice added that despite his slightly distorted sense of time, he believes the solar eclipse will occur in 3 days at noon. He isn't sure how many more floors they must go through, and if they can't reseal this place before then, it will be over. Lilia met Gil's gaze and said it had nothing to do with him. Gil stared at her in surprise. Lilia looked at him seriously and said she and Eurus had come on a mission, and that if any of them left, they would not be able to seal the fallen king again. The girl told Gil he wasn't needed for this mission, and he lowered his head. He realized that from now on survival was no longer guaranteed, though it had been that way before. If they met the great apocryphal beast next, it would not be a fight for survival, but simply certain death. Lily bowed and thanked Gil for coming so far with him, then smiled and said the man had already done enough. The young man was in complete disarray and knew he had to confront his own weaknesses in the maze. For example, Jill cannot fight normally without his glasses. Not only has he lost his life, but he also cannot protect his friends. He said he was going to tell me something that might not be entirely reasonable. The young man realized it was serious because they had little time before the eclipse. Eunice said they still had a very long way to go. Gil fell silent. Lilia watched him with concern. Eunice realizes he no longer has any reason to fight. Still, he told Gil he was pleading with him to risk his life to save the world. Eunice asked him to take them to the lowest floor. Gil felt his heart flutter only because he feared the huge responsibility and burden. Gil knelt down and held out his hands, saying he only knows how to swing a sword. Lilia asked him if the man really thinks so. Gil noticed the man had a terrible sense of direction. Without anyone by his side, he will never see the sky again. Lilia smiled and thanked the man. Lilia and Eunice took Gil by the hands and helped him to his feet. He thought he had completely forgotten why he had come to the maze. Eunice and Lilia smiled, glad that Jill had decided to continue his journey with them. The 3 young men continued on their way. Their steps were heavier than before, but somehow they seemed hopeful. Someone asked which road to take, and the other said he would trust his own instincts. Kuraha remembered hearing that name many times as a child, and it was a fearsome enemy from ancient writings, a servant of the fallen king, an apocryphal beast. He reached the city, and Arlene looked up in disbelief as fragments left by the monster flew toward her. She wondered whether the fallen king had awakened again, then pushed the thought aside and decided this was no time to dwell on it. Moving quickly, she urged Karaha to hurry too, because they needed to reach the cathedral immediately. Otherwise, the city will be reduced to scorched earth. Kuraaha shouted that she understood everything. Remembering Holland telling her to go with Arlene, she knew he would return once he found his family. What to do first occupied her thoughts as Gil, Godok, and Hodland came to mind, and she recalled how Gil had stayed in the maze. Kuraha was desperate and needed someone to help her. The girl looked ahead. Kuroha halted. Arlene turned to her and Kuroha told her to go ahead. Chaos swept the city as many residents fled and tried to escape while everything slowly began to collapse. Kuraha found a little girl lying on the ground by the destroyed building and asked if her mother was okay, but could not find her. Gorky's girl sobbed and stared around in shock. Kira stepped forward and used a stick to clear the remaining wreckage. She said she would help right away. Kiraha pushed the large stone aside and pulled the girl into a closer hug. Kuraha considered what to do now and remembered that with Gil she had never been able to help him. Kiraha smiled and asked if the girl could stand up. The girl took her hand and thanked her. Kiraha felt everything would be different now. One girl put the other on her back and turned, surprised to see two monsters that looked like huge spiders behind them, one on each side. One of the monsters rushed straight at them. Kuroha wondered how the maze monsters could have gotten in here. The girl decided she had to fight back against them, but I thought it would be useless and needed to run right away. Kuraha saw a huge monster closing in on her. Two people stepped in front of her. One of them noticed her, turned, and called out to her. The blond man stepped closer to Kuraha and the girl, and the other man asked if they were all right. Holin arrived a short time later, smoked a cigarette, and said they had almost reached the cathedral, and now all that remained was to help the wounded. Kuraha noticed him and called out. The man turned and was very surprised to see her. Another man she had seen earlier hobbled over and roughly grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know what was going on. Kuraha hesitantly tried to reply but was cut off by a blond man shouting that Hoslin should have let her escape. Holin withdrew his hand and said there was nothing more he could do, clutching his head as he added that it no longer mattered. The man realized that in the end, he even tried to persuade her to join the Holy Knights, but it didn't work. Hoslin went on, saying he was sure Kuraha would refuse. It doesn't matter what they do or how they do it. The man smiled and said the girl looked like them, then looked at her and added that Kuraha was just as weak and inexperienced. Still, she is not afraid to move forward. Like before, they would not give up on their dreams. Holblin remembered how Godak led them when they spent time together. They pulled away again and again, but she kept looking for another way. Holin said Kuraha is stubborn and persistent, refusing to back down. The man said Kuraha would surely become a great adventurer someday. The girl looked at him and felt discouraged. The other man said Kuraha had to leave town before something like this could happen. He shouted that she should have done it before she rotted away like the others. Before Kuraha was bound so tightly that escape would be impossible. Earlier, she would have become a pathetic version of herself like they are now. Everyone listened silently with their heads down. The man began to calm down as his friend put his hand on his head. Hodland lit another cigarette. Kuraha looked at confidently she told everyone she would not run away. People were surprised. Holland chuckled and said everything happened just as he had predicted. Kuraha asked hesitantly if that did not apply to them, since they would not have come here armed otherwise. She asked if they would still fight. A man shouted yes, and she told everyone that if they refused, no one else would. He pointed out that their families live in this city and they must protect their loved ones. Holland smoked quietly and felt he agreed with everything, remembering when they sat together and talked. Memories of sitting with Godak and the others came back. Someone asked Godak if the guild mattered to him. He replied he did, saying he could find the support he needed here and that they should help the next generation do the same. Holland wanted to be a cornerstone for someone who would continue their path and go even further, and he remembered how he named their guild. The man shouted that if they could not defend their own city, they had no right to be called S-rank. Hanslund told everyone they needed to show their determination, plan for the future. They may have lost their pride. Holland watched the little girl who had found her parents and saw Kuraha waving at her. A man called to her and warned her not to die. Kuraha said she understood, and the S-rank adventurers moved in, resolutely entering the battle. Everyone moved into battle and began to engage one of the monsters. Holland called the archers to follow him because he needed them to shoot the monsters from a height. Kuraha told everyone to calm down and head to the cathedral because there was a place to hide. Then one of the monsters slipped through and walked straight toward Kuraha. The girl spotted him, tossed a small bag at him, and a blinding flash of light appeared instantly. Dazzled by the brightness, Kuroha turned away and closed her eyes. She used a light grenade that briefly slows the monster. That was more than enough. Kuroha called out to the others that they could go now, since the path had cleared. Hauflin shouted that 5th Street was already clear and they had to fall back immediately, and he asked for help in the eastern area. Holland said they already had plenty of arrows and told the others to keep shooting so no monster could escape. One of the men replied that he understood, and the archers continued firing at the monsters without stopping. Kura paused to catch her breath. She wiped sweat from her face and looked up at the top. Seeing Herlin present her to the class meant she had done a good job, and she smiled at his hand. Karaha looked at him and saw the apocryphal beast coming straight at them, and her eyes widened in terror. She immediately shouted into the hole and told him to turn around. Suddenly, a huge bird-like monster appeared next to him. By the time the monster landed, everyone here had already fallen. Holland watched the ferocious bird lunge to attack. Her feathers must be made of steel, he thought. Hoslin kept falling, and, glancing to the side, saw that Kuraha could not resist either. Both collapsed to the ground. Kurohaha asked if Hoxilin was all right. Hoxilin held his head and said he was fine. The man thanked the girl for saving him in some way. Olin frowned and said there was something more important right now. The man asked her to pack up. After all, they are now facing death itself, and the same huge monster appeared before him. Both tensed and stared at him. Then a voice came from somewhere, and Holland asked who was there. Someone said they had finally caught the monster's attention. Kuraha called out to Hazan, but the man cut her off and said it was too early. Someone shouted that Holland had to act immediately, and he saw the monster was surrounded by magicians. The magicians struck the monster with raw magical energy, then bound and held him. Kuraha cheered them they had caught the monster, and Hodlin said it was too early to be happy. Holin ordered everyone to shoot the immobilized monster without giving it time to think, and to cover it with a barrage of arrows. Many arrows whistled toward the monster as Kuraha watched everything closely. It looked like they were targeting his wings from every side, since that is a common tactic against flying monsters. Horland ordered the archers to keep firing and took up a bow himself, keeping his aim on the monster. No matter how strong his feathers were, they wouldn't save him from a point-blank shot. And Karaha suddenly realized this. She shouted for Holland to stop, saying it was all a mistake and that instas were dragons after all. The girl said the monster would breathe fire. At the same moment, a torrent of fire poured down on everyone. Then the monster let him in. Holland had no time to react when Kuraha suddenly shielded him, taking the fire onto herself. The man said he did not understand why the girl was here, and Honklin told her to leave immediately. Kuraha smiled and told him to aim for the monster's weak spot. Holland gritted his teeth and said Kuraha was such a stupid person. Kuraha thought the most important thing was to know which cards were in your hand, no matter how useless they seemed at first. A time will come when they prove useful in any situation, and then the right card will appear that you must protect. In a team battle, it will be Kuraha herself. A fiery strike hit her and she screamed in pain. The Kuraha felt her body burning intensely, and everything around her ablaze. As a child, she had reread adventure stories many times and loved them with all her heart. Dragon's breath is both a deadly threat and the greatest opportunity. Her heart fluttered whenever she dreamed, and Kuroha has always wanted adventures like this since she was a child. The monster kept attacking. Hargland fired back using the Lord of the Wind's majestic bow. Hall stopped immediately and called to Kuraha, then moved closer to check her condition. Holland asked her if she was alive. Kuraha weakly said she was while trying to raise her hand. Holland smiled, very happy. The man told the girl not to move under any circumstances, saying he would call a healer from the cathedral and that she should hold on with all her strength for now. Hoglin said that without Karaha, he would never have been able to kill that monster, then looked at her with gratitude and told her she had done a great job. Kuraha felt terrible. She forced a smile and let out a nervous chuckle. Holland said they would handle the remaining monsters for now, so she should rest. The girl thanked him. Holland realized Karaha had saved not only them, but the whole city, and said the girl would be given a medal when she woke up. A scream rang out, and before it ended, Hoslin looked up to see a large number of flying monsters in the sky heading straight for the city. Dropping his cigarette to the ground, the man stared in disbelief as others shouted that this simply could not be. They had barely coped with one monster, and now there are so many of them. Holland froze, unable to move, terrified and silent as everyone looked at him in surprise and someone called out to him. A man shouted for everyone to go to the cathedral, promising to buy them some time, and Haslun looked at him in disbelief. Someone shouted that the entire kingdom faced destruction. People hailed Hosalan and urged him to leave immediately. Kura had already asked him to leave. The man frowned and shouted angrily. One of his comrades ordered everyone who was able to give their best. The rest of us stand up for them. He said he needed to distract the other monsters, even if it was only for a few seconds. He ordered everyone to open fire. Then Horland turned and saw a flying monster start a fire in the sky. The man knew the last insta was nothing compared to this one and ran. Holland realized he couldn't make it as the fire came straight at him. The other archers stood frozen, watching. Ha'al shouted in desperation at what was happening. Everyone fought desperately for their lives. Kura Ha'al stood motionless and powerless, watching. Monsters closed in too quickly. A sword-wielding man appeared in the sky. Eunice was the one. He struck at the monsters. Kiraya could barely make out the man in front of her and could not tell who he was. Eunice smiled and said it seemed they had arrived just in time, but he added the total solar eclipse would begin only at dawn. He raised his hand. Eunice stepped forward to show what the Archmage of the Stars had gained by overcoming countless trials. He gained true strength. Eunice used his magic to summon a starfall that struck the monsters. Meanwhile, Lilia greeted everyone, waved to a soldier and Arnalate, said she had finally returned. Arnalate was surprised the saint was back, and she apologized for being a little late. Arnalate was about to ask where Lilia had been all this time, then, outraged, told her not to use that name in front of strangers, and since it no longer mattered, explained the city's current situation to the girl. Arnalate said there are many casualties and widespread destruction right now. 3 roads to the cathedral were blocked, and the arrival of so many instas has made things worse. Lilia said she was leaving everything to her. With a sigh, she added she could still help Arnalate and entered the building, where everyone reacted loudly when they saw her. The girl saw in front of her an exhausted woman lying on the ground, and a little girl beside her crying bitterly and screaming that something had happened to her mother. Lilia reassured her not to worry. At the same time, Arnalate looked up and saw the monster birds, which were startled and falling to the ground. Arnalate noticed Lily calm down and begin using her magic. Lily said the number of victims will now be reduced to 0. A bright flash of light lit the room. Arnalee shielded her eyes with her hands. Turning, Arnalee saw the girl's mother regain consciousness. The daughter cried with joy and clung to her. Arnlet saw the woman healed instantly and was very surprised, thinking how glad she was that Lilia was still alive. A bright light lit it, and people were surprised at themselves as they began to notice their wounds healing and everyone getting better. Surprised, Haviland looked up at the sky, then turned and saw Kuraha, who was looking down at her hands. Amazement hit her as her wounds faded and movement returned, and a man's silhouette stood in front of her. The young man turned, and Kuraha saw Gil standing in front of her, smiling and apologizing for getting lost. Gil remembered how hard it had been to search every nook and cranny all this time without even being able to sit down. Every monster in sight. Those 3 days were really difficult and stressful. Feeling guilty, he took a deep breath and shouted, trying to call Kuraha. When he asked where she was, the girl said she was sitting right here. To his surprise, the young man turned and saw the girl standing right beside him. Gil looked ahead and saw Holland watching him closely, frowning as the plan for the future came to mind. Holland was at a complete loss. Gil crouched and quietly asked Kuraha what was happening. Eunice said she was the only one on his side. The girl said that when the animals began to attack, they evacuated all residents to the cathedral, secured escape routes, and helped anyone who could not leave in time. Then the apocryphal beasts appeared. Kiraaha realized that without them, they would not have survived long. Gil thought deeply. The young man asked how much she knew about the apocryphal beasts and whether they had already found their leader. The girl asked him again and said she had not seen anyone like him. Gil said that in that case, he was clearly targeting the cathedral. The man thought that if he waited a bit longer, everything would clear up. Gil asked Karahi to take him there. Karahi said she could, of course. Holland stood behind the man, called him a hero, and asked what they should do next. Gil turned and asked what it was, stared at Holland in disbelief when the man asked if they needed help, and then the young man thought about his words. Kuroha turned to him and said none of them would escape anymore. He met her gaze and said he understood everything. Gil said he didn't need their help and told them to focus more on saving people. Gil said he was counting on them. The man replied that they would consider everything. Kuraha pointed to one of the houses and said a large building stood on the other side. Gil thought about it. Surprised, she looked at him as he tried to see what Kuraha was showing him. Noticing that Gil couldn't see, the girl told him to wait a moment. The girl placed the glasses in his hands. Kuraha said she had been saving them so she could give them to him personally. She said the glasses might have been damaged in the last battle and opened the box. Gil picked up the glasses. The girl watched him closely. He lifted them and smiled, unable to hide it. Kuraha asked if the glasses were still completely intact, and Jill answered immediately, clearly pleased. Immediately he put on his glasses and, with a joy he'd never known, said he could now see everything, including the city, the stars, and the sky. Pointing with his finger, he named exactly what he saw: the building, the stone, even the dog. Gil missed nothing in front of him. The man shouted that he could now see everything clearly with the glasses. Jill asked the girl if it was cool. Kuroha was surprised and hesitantly agreed with him. The girl kept looking at him. Gil smiled, took off his cape and put it on Kuraha. Gil said that now that he has glasses, he can spot small details, and he realized Kuraha must be frozen. She smiled and thanked him. Gil winked at her, then ran ahead, saying they urgently needed to go to the cathedral. Kuraha shouted at him not to run that way because it was the wrong direction, and she suspected that even with the glasses, Jill still had no sense of direction. Meanwhile, Lilia came down and was surprised to find Jill standing before her, and she said Jill's face had changed, while the man replied she might not know, but that's just wearing glasses. The girl grinned and said he was very lucky because he looks good with glasses. Jill smiled broadly and agreed with her. Lilia also added that she has good news. Jill gave her a questioning look. She said she and Eunice poured so much energy into printing and those massive spells that they used up almost everything. In short, they have run out of mana, and Gil was taken aback, asking how that could be good news. Footsteps sounded behind him, and he turned immediately. Kuraha looked ahead as well. Lilia smiled gently. She said Jill would fight him one-on-one. Kira asked hesitantly if this was the man Jill had mentioned earlier. A man was walking toward them. Asked if the leader was the girl Lilia. The saint said everything was as she had thought. This is an apocryphal magical artifact. Kariya asked if Lilia meant the Erasim. Kariya considered the apocryphal magical gear. After all, the fallen king himself used only 13 different items. Nilea said she was certain that the moment he touched the sword, his heart and mind would be consumed by the fallen king's hatred. All of this was meant to revive the fallen king. Gil turned to Godok and asked him to hear everything the man had to say. Gil added that the abyss has already been resealed by the saint and the archmage, and even if the cathedral is destroyed, the fallen king will not rise from it. He charged straight at them. The man told Jill to run because he could not beat the eraser. Kira and Lilia watched him. Gil was surprised he was still conscious, but he expected nothing less from an S-rank adventurer. He said no one should even hope to defeat this magic sword. Gil drew his sword immediately. The young man asked Godak if that was why he wanted Jill to come. The man said he had known for years he couldn't win alone. Gil concluded the man also knew the fallen king would be reborn if he did nothing about it. Therefore, the man gathered the last of his strength and sent Gil. The plan was for the guy to seal the maze. He replied that it would be impossible even for Gil and told him to run away instead. Gil admitted he still lacked experience, but with this sword he would prove he had made the right choice. Swordsman Jill has finally returned. The man smiled widely and prepared for the upcoming fight. Gil watched him instantly turn into a monster, thinking that half the time a fight is decided by the first blow. The man watched a Godok's hand swell to an enormous size. Gil chose to strike first and began running. He decided to hit him, but the man quickly realized the blow had been blocked. Godok's huge hand grabbed Genz's torso. Using his sword, the man freed himself. He pushed him away and Gil flew to the side. Seeing she was trying to attack him again, the guy jumped so he couldn't catch him. Gil stabbed Godak with a sword, and a bystander watched closely and noticed Godak's incredible regeneration. His body recovers immediately. Gil saw her running toward him again. He thought there were only two ways to deal with him, and the first was to keep attacking until his mana ran out. Gil drove his sword into the man's torso, slicing through him. Turning back, he watched Godok. The man decided it could hardly work with him at all. He began destroying everything around him, but Gil thought there was still another way in this case. The young man braced himself and leaped onto Godok. The second method was to kill him with one blow. Using the 8th sword and the power to split lightning, he delivered Godok a decisive blow. Gil cut off Godok's head with his sword, saw steam rising from Godok's body, watched closely, and heard a strange gurgling sound. Suddenly, a sound rang out and a magical force burst free. Then an explosion struck and destruction spread. Gil barely stayed on his feet. He survived only because he had been holding his power back for years. A huge crater opened in front of him right after the explosion, and Gil realized it happened because he had struck Godak with his magic sword. Regeneration began where the head had been, and the young man noticed. It all started when the sword pierced the Godak warrior's soul and removed an obstacle in its path. Gil saw teeth and a jaw sprouting beneath Godak's body. That was how it was, at least. The monster growled again and started to strike at Gil. When the swordsman reappeared, the man's eyes widened, and he tried to fend off Godak's punches. Gil realized the sword now seethed with rage, a madness unlike anything he had experienced before. The man stared directly at Godak. After regenerating, the monster had a crude head and a warped face with eyes and teeth. For the first time since the magic sword prospector's birth, fear gripped him because of a single swordsman. The guild decided the swordsman would surely break the sword next time. The prospector pointed his weapon directly at Godak. It felt extremely strange, not like gaining knowledge or an awakening. Gil's soul moves much faster than his body and awareness. This shows how to truly wield a sword. He immediately aimed his power at Gil, who dodged instantly. The young man watched all his moves. Meanwhile, he grabbed him. Gil immediately cut off the fingers he was using to hold him. His stump jutted out right in front of Gil, and he thought he could never have reached that level by himself. The man thought it would be impossible if there wasn't a single one. Gil thought about Godak while he was conscious, the saint and the eternally smiling Eunice, even one of them. The young man realized that if he had given up for any reason, he would never have been able to go beyond his limits. Gil smiled, thought of Kuraha, and silently thanked everyone. He was ready to attack again. The monster kept coming straight at him, and he thanked everyone who had helped him get this far. Gil smiled and cut open the monster's torso. Using a rare, secret sword technique, he plunged the blade into him. When Gil used this technique, Godak's exhausted body emerged from under the monster's shell, and the shell immediately fell to the ground. The young man picked up his sword, turned when he heard a sound from somewhere, and after a while joined the others who were waiting for him. Gil saw people greet him cheerfully and call out, and he chuckled, saying he wondered if they were really that worried about him. Kuraha smiled broadly. Lilia was very happy, and Eunice sat on top of one of the houses barking at everything. Gil smiled, still unable to accept it all, and raised his hand joyfully, clearly relieved after everything he'd been through. After a while, Gil found himself in his bed, sleeping soundly, and hearing Lilia call him insistently. The young man saw the girl trying to wake him. She banged a ladle against the pan so the noise would definitely wake Gil. Gil had not slept enough and barely opened his eyes, and when the girl said good morning, he kept staring at her silently until he managed to open his eyes and return the greeting. A few days later, Gil got ready and buttoned his shirt, his hair shorter than before, and Lily asked if the man was leaving that day, said it would be better to wake him early in that case, and asked whether Gil was offended. The man said he did not and added that he was grateful to Lilia for waking him up early. The girl smiled broadly, hid the ladle behind her back, and left the room. Lilia said she would not interfere, told him to change his clothes and wash up, and made clear she did not care whether he did so, only asking him to do everything as quickly as possible. Lilia left his room at once. Gil kept smiling, closed his eyes, and pictured a girl in an apron. Blushing, he decided this was definitely the best thing to see first thing in the morning. He thought he had done his best to hide the feeling in that oppressive atmosphere, but he still pretty much understood everything. Since Eunice was talking to her, Gil decided he would beat up anyone who dared call Lilia an 80-year-old grandmother. The guy's thoughts were interrupted when Eunice appeared in front of him. The guy smiled broadly and greeted him, and Eunice added that they had not seen him since that morning. Gil smiled sheepishly at him, noticing Eunice was in a surprisingly good mood for such an early hour, and she chuckled. He said he was just going to sleep. Eunice said he felt completely exhausted, like a squeezed lemon. He asked Gil if he wanted breakfast. The man agreed. They walked into the dining room and saw Lilia at the far end, happily waving to them. She looked cheerful. The guys were smiling, and Gil figured Lilia had already started eating without them. At last, everyone sat at the table and began to eat. Breakfast was served on one of the plates. Lilia, meanwhile, ate bread with obvious appetite. The girl said they probably won't meet like this again for a while. Eunice asked Gil if he was going to leave soon. The man replied yes and said he would leave before noon. Lily kept eating and asked Gil if he needed a cart, then noticed a paratron had asked her about it. Gil said no, he was fine as he was. Lily said everything was clear now. Everyone sat, stuffing their mouths with food and enjoying the meal. Eunice asked whether they would say their goodbyes immediately after breakfast, and Gil agreed. He added that he needed to go to the hospital briefly and asked if they had definitely regained consciousness. Lilia happily replied that she did. Holding a cup of tea, Jill smiled, glad he would finally fulfill the promise he had been putting off for so long. Lilia also smiled, lifted her cup of tea, and replied that everything was clear now. Gil was about to bring up the promise when the girl cut him off. Lily had reminded him not to forget to write. Eunice and Jill fell silent, and after a few seconds they remembered it. The girl asked them if they had forgotten about it, and Lilia added that it was not cool at all. She asked Gil to make sure to write to her whenever he decided to stay somewhere, and he smiled and said he would, no problem. Lilia asked if they remembered that her handwriting was very cute and beautiful, and Eunice replied that he would definitely turn it into a fantastic secret code. Gil listened quietly and watched them, then warned that his letters would probably not be very interesting. Lilia said she was looking forward to them. Eunice told him to try to come up with something, and he said he would try. A smile crossed his face as he lowered his head. Lilia and Eunice were also very happy, and did not hide their smiles. Gil rose from the table. Lilia told him to make sure the man took care of himself, and Eunice agreed with her. Lilia called to him and raised a finger. Jill turned to look, surprised. She smiled broadly and asked about the goodbye kiss. Gil couldn't believe what he'd just heard and had no idea what was happening. Eunice and Lilia put on mittens shaped like toy animals. The girl jokingly addressed Gila's sweet and told him to hold a kiss. Eunice and Jill tried to tease Jill and kissed him with their cute mittens. The young man had not expected this and looked very surprised, frowning, while Gil clearly did not like it. Meanwhile, the man took their mittens and decided to do to them what they had done to him. The young man used toys and pressed them to the faces of Eunice and Lilia, making funny noises that made both Eunice and Lilia laugh. As Jill did this, he realized it was far more fun than he'd imagined. Using one of the toys, he pulled Eunice's cheek. After the game, all three joined hands. Lily turned to Eunice and Gil. They looked at her with puzzled expressions. She smiled and said they would meet again one day. After a while, Gil had already left the gate when he turned back and smiled. Sure, it was fate. Afterward, the young man decided to hit the road. Gil went to one of the hospitals and asked the nurse where to go. The nurse said he needed to go to the 4th floor. Gil found the right room and knocked before entering. Someone on the other side of the door told him to come in. Gil entered the room and immediately said there was no need to apologize, while the man saw a bandaged Godak in front of him with members of the Gil nearby. The man sprang out of bed and called to the young man, asking Godak not to push himself like that. Gil said he'd heard his muscles and bones still hadn't recovered from the magic sword, so he suggested he just lie down. Apologizing, the man lowered his head and said he had wanted to finish before Gil arrived. Since the guy has arrived, he'll probably leave soon. Gil said he decided to visit them one last time. The young man also gave the woman flowers, and he said it was very nice of him. Looking at him again, he immediately lowered his head, feeling guilty, and said he knew Jill had asked him not to apologize, but he still wanted to say something. He said he could not fully thank Gil or properly apologize, and Gil stared at him intently. He admitted he had personally lured him into a trap, stabbed him in the back, and left him to die alone in the maze, and Gil realized he had been at it again. He said the saint and the archmage had resealed it, and that Gil even destroyed the apocryphal equipment, so Gil saved not only this city but the whole world. Gil's smiled, happy to think they had come a long way, felt it was very cool, and said there was no conceivable way for someone like him. I wanted to be able to properly thank Gil or apologize someday, and he shouted that he would do everything he could, no matter what the man told him, even if it cost him his life. Gil was furious that he had learned it only from Godash, and told him to stop immediately and never say such things. He couldn't see why Jill contradicted him. A man walked up and said he needed to clarify something with him. Gil added that he didn't care, saying that when he nearly killed the man, he had wanted to beat him up. Sadness showed on his face as he looked at Gil. Gil couldn't grasp what the man meant, and the young man said Godok had no choice. The man watched him closely and warned that a single wrong step could have killed Jill. The man took a deep breath and said that after many visits from members of the Gotaha group, most of whom are now nearby, they kept apologizing to Gil, specifically for what he had done to Gil, for their own cowardice, and for crimes so serious they could no longer be called adventurers in such a situation. Gil said that despite everything, he doesn't care about any of it. I was amazed by what I had just heard. The young man said the years did not force him to enter the maze with him, nor did they lure him into a trap. The man realized he trusted the other and looked up. Gil said everyone did the best they could. The twists and turns of fate and the mix of strengths and weaknesses brought them to where they are now, and everyone has to decide for themselves how to treat it. Gilles smiled broadly and said that despite this, he was glad they had to go through this tortuous and difficult path. Completely amazed, he said nothing as tears ran down his cheeks, and he immediately covered his face with his hand. Gil said he was most proud that despite his cursed body, he chose him to be the sword to pave the way. On a narrow path the man chose to enter. Drops of Godok's tears soaked the sheets on his bed. He kept crying, covering his face with his hands. Years had brought Gil here and given him a chance to save the whole world, and he bowed to thank the man for the opportunity. Soon Gil left the hospital where he'd spent years, gave her one last look, smiled, and walked on. Gil saw many wagons ahead and noticed Arnolate busy working and directing the workers. The girl turned and saw the guy and was very surprised. Meanwhile, one of the workers recognized Jill, and the guy immediately tensed up. All eyes turned to Gil, the man who saved their city. People shouted, calling him a hero and savior, and some even called him master. He asked them not to call him mister. One person apologized, saying Jill cared so much about their saint. No one could have imagined that the young man could be treated any other way or without due respect. He replied that he now understood what the matter was. Someone laughed and apologized, calling Gil a gentleman again. The girl with glasses approached him and told me what she knew about Jill's death. There were legends about his power, but she could not imagine Jill returning. She added that they were very grateful to him, and that if he needed anything, Jill could safely contact them. The man thought the girl's name was Arnolate, and that she served Lilia. Gil drank the water. Gil decided Arnolate was probably a good person. Smiling, the girl asked Gil how she could help, added that Lilia had said he was about to leave, and he replied positively. Mr. Gil asked Arnolate where Kuraha was. Arnolate stood up at once and called out to everyone that Mr. Gil wanted to speak with her. She asked if anyone knew where the girl was now. Everyone quickly reacted and cheerfully said that the hero himself, the savior, Mr. Gil, had come to them. A girl said that if they were looking for Kuraha, she should be back soon. Arnlilith smiled and thanked her for the information. Beaming with joy, she was very pleased. Arnolate told Gil that everything was settled and that he only needs to wait a little. Arnolite said she needed to get back to her job now, and Gil was sweating, ashamed and stunned by the awkward, strange situation he'd ended up in. Meanwhile, the crowd hailed him as a great hero. The man turned and saw Hostland standing in front of him. Noticing his clothes, he was about to mention them, but Holand cut him off and said he was leaving today. Gil said he understood everything, and asked the man if he had visited Godok. Hostland said yes, and added he had visited Godok not long ago. Gil then said everything was clear to him. Hoagland began to move forward but stopped, looked at Gil, and told the great hero he could never fully thank him for his help. Gillis Shirdian said he had heard those words 1,000 times before, and asked the man how their research was progressing. Poland was surprised, and said it was thanks to Gil that everything was going well, because now that the fallen king has been sealed again, the man who leaked through the seal has begun to disappear. Exploring the maze has become much easier, but its structure is still extremely complex, so they can't reach the deeper floors yet. When they find a suitable path, they set up camps at regular intervals to gain a foothold. Gild drank the water and answered. Now he understood everything. The man noticed this earlier and said, "You need to be as careful as possible when passing through that door, because there might still be a small creature out there, and they should not let their guard down." Holland understood everything. Holland said he would join the first big push to the ground floors, so the man would definitely watch the area. Gil said he hoped so. As a last resort, he said it is better to always have many people available who can defeat apocryphal beasts. Hoeflin agreed with him, then took a chair and set it beside him to sit down. Hoeflin and Jill sat next to each other under the awning. Holland looked at Gil and asked if that was why he had come here. Gil admitted it was true, and Holland said he understood everything. Gil saw people walking toward him, upright with backpacks, and a girl noticed him, called out, then ran to him. They greeted each other. Gil paused right away. Holland asked why he was so nervous. He said it was his first time. Holland scoffed at him and accused him of claiming to be a great hero. Kuraha stared at them in surprise. She didn't understand what he was talking about. Holland kicked him and told him to get moving. Gil cried out in pain. Blushing, he said he'd made a promise after all. The girl stared at him intently. Jill started to feel very nervous as he spoke hesitantly, saying Karaha probably no longer remembers all the details. The girl interrupted him, surprised that Gil still hadn't forgotten, and Karaha set the bag down on the ground. The man grew nervous as the woman said painfully that she did not deserve all this because she had done nothing. Kuraha said that if Hodgland, the rest of the group, Arnolate, and everyone else had not helped her, the girl definitely would not have been able to handle everything on her own. Kuraha lowered his head. None of this felt like her doing. Gil smiled. That, he said, applied to him as well. The man asked whether Kurahan understood him. Gil said someone should have given him a good kick in the pants, and in the end, he only did what he could. Kuraha broke down in bitter tears. Gil continued, saying that from now on he would constantly push beyond his limits. During the coming search to find and destroy the apocryphal beast that slipped through the seal, and through the dark times that follow, he will rely on others. Those who stand shoulder to shoulder with Gil. He said he believes there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for help. He asked Karahi, brave and always moving forward, to help him in this case, and reached out his hand with a smile. Gild said that after all, his sense of direction is terrible, and alone he will probably not reach the roots he needs. Karaka kept crying, convinced this was exactly what she had always dreamed of. Gil said he would like the girl to help him on the journey in exchange for letting her wield a sword. Hiding her face in her hands, she began to cry for her. Kuraha has always dreamed of becoming a true adventurer, unsure she deserved it, the girl said. Memories lingered of how, as a child, she had indulged in dreams of living the life of a real heroine. Still, she decided to try anyway. Smiling, she told him she would be happy to go on the trip. They shook hands. Now she was determined not to back down. About 3 years ago, Gil found a girl and asked her to take him in for a while. She asked if he was lost. I kept wondering if I had really eaten nothing but dirt for the last 3 days, and if dirt was edible at all. He was allowed to live in this house for a while. The girl warned that if Jill wandered the city in this form, especially with a sword, it would cause serious trouble. The guy began to cry bitterly. The host said she would shelter him briefly, provided he caused no trouble. Gil thought how generous she was and asked her for food. She told him to go inside. The man smiled, introduced himself as Gil, and said he was also called the Dragon Slayer. Gil said she could tell him if she needed any help. At that moment, the girl fell silent and drew her sword. Some would say it was long ago, while others would say it happened only recently. Gil has begun writing letters to Eunice and Lilia, asking how they are and describing what is happening in the East. He came here to see a well-known optician but went bankrupt, which really knocked the wind out of him. Having made many friends here, he is thinking about staying here. Gil wrote that he was glad everything was finally over after the chaos of the maze, asked Lilia if she had already returned to the main cathedral, asked Unanis if he planned to return to the Great Library, and told them to let him know as soon as they received the letter. Gil also asked whether they had ever taught students. This was his first time doing this, so some things were confusing, and he will be glad to hear their advice. Gild decided to write to Lilia himself. His writing style was completely different from his speech. Lilia lay on her bed, smiling broadly as she read his letter. In a letter to Eunice, Gil wrote that his secret code was too complicated. He said he still had not figured it out, and a whole week had already passed. Eunice was happy when word came to him from Gil. Gil decided to read Lilia's letter, which also mentioned Eunice, where she said she hoped both of them would never change. asked Gil to return the mysterious old woman, and signed it, "With love, Lilia." The young man also read a letter from Eunice. It was addressed to both of them and said he didn't even have friends, let alone students. Gilly Eunice personally asked him to think about this and about himself as much as possible. For 6 hours straight, Eunice signed, "Sincerely yours, Archmage." Gil smiled sincerely and closed the letters he had just read. Closing his eyes, he thought about what to write, planning to say he had asked Eunice and Lilia about it in vain. Meanwhile, Kuraha approached the man who had called to him. The young man gave her a questioning look. The girl thought there were monsters ahead, so they could not go any further. Galaster asked if they could walk in that case, and the girl said they would most likely be able to. Kuraha said the map showed a road there. Gil smiled gently, remembering it had been 2 full weeks since they left the city. To be honest, the adventure was pretty calm. Gil suggested they walk the rest of the way, and Kuraha agreed. Many would not call this adventure calm, since the option the man planned fell through and the van that was supposed to keep going stopped. Some might say this hardly seems like a quiet adventure, but Jill usually loses her way or forges a new path. When the man was traveling, something very strange happened. Jill decided that nothing like this had ever happened after all. He realized that before he could even come to his senses, he was already in a completely unfamiliar place. To know where he was, Gil always climbed to the highest places so he could get a clear view of everything around him. In those cases, he went with the river's flow just to reach the ocean. Gil remembered how, in some baffling way, he had ended up buried in the ground, and he decided he would never have to go through this again. Gil had never imagined, even in his wildest dreams, that he could travel without worrying about anything. With his eyes closed, he thought about many things. Kuraha called to him, stepped closer, and grabbed the edge of his jacket, making him turn around immediately. The girl decided to stop him. She said they didn't have to go the way Jill wanted. The man looked at her in surprise. Grinning, he said he was just looking around. Gil noticed the flowers hadn't bloomed yet this year. The girl agreed with him. Kuraha said that when he mentioned it, she thought the trees should already be covered in leaves. Gil asked the girl if she knew much about plants. The girl said she certainly wouldn't have answered like that. Kuraha said she had just read about it in the directory. The man looked at her and said he understood. Gil felt like they were a companion and a student. He remembered that Kuraha had never let him down. The girl asked Gil what he had taught her 3 days earlier. The man asked for clarification. Striking a pose, she asked whether she should hold the sword's hilt in that position. Gil replied that it depends on the situation. The man said that if the girl held it with that grip, the sword would be steadier, and she could put much more power into the strike. Besides learning, he also fought with insta. And the most remarkable thing was his understanding of the sword. His master would certainly say that Jill is the real problem. He remembered the stern man asking if he was thinking nonsense while brandishing a sword. In response to his lengthy reasoning, Gil realized he now wielded a sword himself. Kuraha wrote down all the important details she had heard from Gil as he continued to smile broadly. The man decided the training was going well, and Gil figured that was likely why he felt so worried. Kuraha noticed Gil's shoe strap was untied, knelt to help him, but he said it was fine and he could do it himself. The girl said everything was fine and she had almost finished his shoes. Gil blushed and thanked her, and Kuraharu replied that it was no problem. Gil wondered whether Kuroha thought it was honest. He noticed she handled the travel preparations and every small detail, and in recent days she has been solving even the most trivial issues. They affect his daily life, and if this goes on for a couple more months, Jill fears his body will no longer be able to survive without her, and he frowned in horror as he thought about it. Kuroha helped Gil during the journey in exchange for him teaching her swordsmanship, and she asked whether he was sweating and felt hot, and Gil thought they should be on equal footing. Gil understood that the maze situation made him feel Kuraha was indebted to him, but in the end it tipped the scales too far, and that was not good. Gil thought about what he could do for the girl in this case, and while deep in thought, a sudden idea struck him. Gil called to the girl. Kuraha turned to look at him. He ran toward her and shouted that he had found a mushroom. Doubting anyone would even find him in the directory, he noticed, unfortunately, that it was a poisonous mushroom. In the worst case, a single bite causes instant death, and mountain squirrels have developed immunity to the poison and regularly eat these mushrooms. So people lost in the mountains wrongly think mushrooms are safe to eat. Gil said he understood. The girl apologized for interrupting him. The man said it was fine. Karaha asked if he had any questions. Gil said the mushroom causes mouth ulcers and fevers, but it still tastes good. They both fell silent. The girl was stunned by what he had just said. Gil decided it was time to stop sharing his culinary tricks.